presence of a quorum. May I ask the committee secretary to acknowledge our guests and resource persons attending today? Thank you.
Good morning to our dear senators. Good morning to our resource persons. May I acknowledge the presence of the following resource persons for today's hearing. From the BSP, Deputy Governor Francis Daquila, Senior Assistant Governor and General Counsel Attorney Elmer Capule, and our Governor, Dr. Felipe Medalla. From the DOF, Department of Finance, Assistant Secretary Ruth Rosinio and Bernabe Jr. From the Land Bank of the Philippines, President and CEO Ms. Cecilia C. Borromeo and her Executive Vice President Mr. Karel D. Halog. From the NEDA, Undersecretary Rosemary Edelion. From the Development Bank of the Philippines, Vice President Mr. Rodrigo Jesus V. Mantaring, and his Senior Assistant Vice President Ms. Maria Luisa L. Aguirre Pangilinan. From the Bureau of Treasury, Ms. Rosalia V. De Leon. From the DBM, Undersecretary Joselito Basilio, Mr. Ryan Joseph Calalang. From GCG, Commissioner Gideon D.V. Mortel. Yes. From the OGCC, Assistant Government Corporate Counsel, Ms. Melissa M. Acorda. From the COA, Ms. Marie Frances Hazel S. Acevedo, Acting Supervising Auditor of the DBP. Ms. Nida A. Singson, Acting Supervising Auditor of the LBP. Ms. Althea Rosas Ladores, Acting Supervising Auditor of the BSP, and Attorney Erwin E. Lapitan, Attorney 6 Legal Affairs Office, Legal Services Sector. From the SEC, Chairman Attorney Emilio Aquino, and Arjin M. Lacanaria, Mr. Rafael Russell Castro, and Romuald Padilla. From the Bankers Association of the Philippines, Mr. Benjamin Castillo and Mr. Arnel Almaden. From the PAGCOR, Assistant Vice President Attorney Arnold Salvosa. Thank you, sir. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Win Gatchalian. Thank you. Oh, and of course, Senator Villar, Senator Cynthia Villar, of course. Yes. So please allow us to state specific House rules to ensure the orderly and efficient conduct of the hearing. Can the committee secretary inform today's attendees of our House rules? Thank you.
Kindly mute your microphone if you are not recognized or do not wish to be recognized. Since the visuals of the online meeting are limited, please inform the chairperson of your inquiry by specifying your name before stating your concern, comment, or position. All data that the resource persons wish to present relative to the subject today may be submitted to the committee secretariat for the consideration of this body. Only one representative per office or organization will be allowed to speak for their respective organizations. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again for attending this committee hearing and assisting us in understanding the topics to be discussed this morning. For today's hearing, the committee will discuss House Bill number 6608 by House Speaker Romualdez, House Majority Leader Dalipe, Representative Kimbo and et al., and Senate Bill number 1670 by this representation, proposing for an act establishing the Maharlika Investment Fund, providing for the management, investment, and use of the proceeds of the fund, and appropriating funds thereof. This bill seeks to create a Maharlika investment fund that will be used to invest in programs and projects which may help in generating income and in attaining government economic plans. The Maharlika Investment Fund Corporation shall be established to govern and manage the said fund. I filed Senate Bill number 1670 in order to open the discussion on this matter. The House approved version is a good start as it already underwent scrutiny in the House of Representatives. In today's hearing, we will be focusing the discussion on the objective, purpose, necessity, and benefits of the Maharlika Bill. We will also examine the management of the funds and the fund sources so that our colleagues in the Senate and the public will be enlightened as to the contents of the bill. We shall ensure that this will be a venue to tackle the various important issues surrounding the subject, measure, and the matters that need further clarification. We will open up a dialogue so that the Senate and the public can scrutinize this significant measure that may affect the future of our country. We're open to studying suggestions and other proposals or alternatives on the proposed measure. The public may post their comments in the comment box. We have staff who are monitoring your questions and reactions. Please feel free to raise your concerns and questions. We will ask the resource person some questions originating from the public to encourage the public's participation. The Senate, being an independent institution, will perform its duty and responsibility to review and discuss measures affecting national interests. We will not rush. We will take our time in order to arrive at the best version possible for the benefit of the Filipino people. At the end of the day, in considering this piece of proposed legislation, our paramount priority is we must always have the welfare of the people in mind. With that in mind, we proceed to a hearing of the proposed bill for the creation of the Maharlika Investment Fund. May I ask the other senators at this hearing if they have any opening statement prior to discussion? Sen? I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Cheese Escudero. Morning. Thank you. We now proceed with the discussion. In the interest of time and with the permission of my colleagues, we shall finish the presentation first before we ask our questions or seek clarification. We will recognize our colleagues in order of their arrival. Who's May I call on the economic team to make their presentation on the respective positions on the bills that are the subject matter of today's hearing. Please make your presentation succinct, limited to approximately 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Honorable Chairman, if it's okay, may we start with the presentation?
Yes, please proceed.
Honorable Mark Villar, the Chair of the Committee on Banks, also Honorable Senator Francis Escudero, Honorable Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, Honorable Senator Cynthia Villar. Good morning to everyone. And of course, Governor Medalla, ladies and gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, with the permission of Leah, may I ask, is this
Please
going to be a singular consolidated presentation by the entire economic team? Isa lang?
Yes, it will be.
So wala nang ipe-present ang BSP, ang DBM, ang DOF. This is going to be it.
Yes.
And second query, Mr. Chairman, is this based on any pending measure? Or is this your own version of the bill?
This is based on the version of the House and of course the version that was submitted by the Senate by Senator Mark Villar.
Are they the same?
More or less, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ma'am Leah.
Thank you. So to continue on, decades ago, it used to be that sovereign wealth funds were exclusive to resource-rich countries such as Kuwait, Norway, and the United Arab Emirates as a means to protect the value and maximize the earnings on revenue surpluses from commodity exports so as to extend its benefits to posterity. Today, however, this is no longer the case. More than 50 countries are now with sovereign wealth funds, many of whom belong to the same level of economic development as the Philippines, such as Indonesia, Vietnam, and Kenya, to mention a few. Capitalization is no longer exclusive to surplus revenues generated by natural resources, but has now grown to include varying sources, including budgetary contributions, as in the case of the Indonesia Investment Authority. Also, the objective for establishing sovereign wealth funds has broadened to include other economic goals, such as to help stabilize the country's economic base through asset diversification, to limit the effects of capital flows on money supply, to increase returns via international portfolio investments, and to facilitate long-term development. In fact, some countries have more than one sovereign wealth.
De, galing mo, be. Ang ano, meron akong mic nito.
May party line. More than one sovereign wealth fund to serve different objectives. Singapore, for example, created two distinct funds. One, the GIC, whose objective is to preserve and enhance Singapore's international purchasing power over the long term, and is therefore invested heavily on foreign assets, while Temasek, whose economic stability goal is more aligned with holdings of domestic assets. Sovereign wealth funds are no longer defined simply as government-owned vehicles investing their capital overseas. Today, the industry is highly complex with mixed forms of legal structure, ownership, and portfolios. Governments use sovereign wealth funds to meet their particular economic goals, and a fund's objectives can evolve with time to suit the country's needs. The Philippines will greatly benefit from having its own sovereign wealth fund, especially with respect to boosting our long-term economic productivity. Having a sovereign wealth fund will help advance our infrastructure development. Following the example of Indonesia Investment Authority, we can structure a sovereign wealth fund that allows co-investments and partnerships with foreign entities and thereby attract large foreign capital into our high priority sectors. We can use a sovereign wealth fund to attract the best talents from the private sector and to gain membership in sovereign wealth fund associations that may develop into partnerships with other sovereign wealth funds for local projects. The Philippines, being one of the Southeast Asia's fastest growing economies, has a broad range of physical, financial, and human capital assets. With the country's strong growth coupled with its sustainable development plan and of course, the economic liberalization measures passed by Congress, now is the time to establish the proposed Maharlika Investment Fund. The overall purpose for the establishment of the Maharlika Investment Fund is to optimize the use of government financial assets and promoting their intergenerational management in order to maximize returns and advance the fund's developmental objectives. The specific mandate of the MIF would define the investment strategies through the creation of sub-funds with specific investment and risk management frameworks and investment horizons. A fund with a developmental strategic or objective with a long-term horizon may be created to promote economic development by making strategic and profitable investments. On the other hand, a fund with a commercial objective will obtain optimal absolute return and achievable financial gains on its investments. The Maharlika Investment Fund shall be founded on the Santiago Principles, which identify a framework of generally accepted principles that properly reflect appropriate governance and accountability arrangements, as well as the conduct of investment practices by sovereign wealth funds on a prudent and sound basis. The Santiago Principles seek to ensure that through the pursuit of these practices, the sovereign wealth funds continue to bring economic and financial benefits to home countries, recipient countries, and the international financial system. The following are the key themes embodied in the Santiago Principles. First is the establishment of a governance framework that will allow the fund to fulfill its mandates and achieve its objectives. Second, relevant information of the fund should be clear and disclosed publicly. Third, the business processes and systems shall be grounded on clearly defined rules and procedures and must satisfy regulatory requirements. Finally, the fund should target to provide a risk-adjusted operating model. The MIC, or the Maharlika Investment Corporation, shall be created as a corporate vehicle for the purpose of mobilizing and utilizing the Maharlika Investment Fund to make investments that will maximize returns and contribute to the sustainable economic growth of the country. The initial capitalization of the MIC shall be sourced from the Land Bank of the Philippines and the Development Bank of the Philippines. Land Bank shall invest 50 billion pesos and DBP shall contribute 25 billion pesos. Each government financial institution may increase its investment above the required equity contribution, and they shall be entitled to prudential and other regulatory reliefs as may be determined by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to ensure their financial soundness while contributing to the overall objective of the fund. In addition, subsequent annual contributions from GOCCs and other sources to the fund shall be provided as follows. For the first 2 years, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas shall remit 100% of its declared dividends to the fund. In the succeeding years, the BSP shall remit 50% of its declared dividends to the fund and the remaining 50% to the national government until the increase in the BSP's capitalization has been fully paid. Thereafter, BSP shall remit 100% of its declared dividends to the fund. Moreover, PAGCOR and other government-owned gaming operators shall contribute at least 10% of gross gaming revenue streams. Lastly, other sources of funding shall include royalties and special assessments on natural resources based on the fiscal regime to be implemented by the national government, proceeds from privatization of government assets, and public borrowings. To ensure that the fund will be able to grow, withdrawals from the fund shall be made only after at least 5 years of investment activities. The notice period for any withdrawal is 1 year or shortened as determined by the board. The capital of the MIC shall not be withdrawn if its effect would be to diminish the MIF to an amount less than the real value of the MIF at its inception. To ensure the sustainability of the fund, sound and credible investment and risk management strategies shall be developed. The board shall ensure that policies formulated are consistent with the objectives of the fund, and this shall be subject to periodic reviews. The investment strategy shall take into account the expectations for returns and the fund's risk tolerance around specific activities like co-investments. Moreover, with the investment strategy, there shall be a clear method for determining performance, not just at the portfolio level, but also for the asset class and even at the individual investment level. In order to prudently manage the fund's risk, it shall focus on generating sustainable, risk-adjusted returns over the long term, properly identify and manage risks, ensure the resilience of its balance sheet, and finally, the MIC can look into investments in emerging megatrends such as fintech, ESG, and healthcare. The following shall serve as allowable investments of the fund, subject to strict compliance with investment and risk management guidelines. Cash, foreign currencies, metals, and other tradable commodities, fixed income instruments issued by sovereigns, quasi-sovereigns, and supranationals, domestic and foreign corporate bonds, listed or unlisted equities, whether common, preferred, or hybrids, Islamic investments such as sukuk bonds, joint ventures or co-investments, mutual and exchange traded funds invested in underlying assets, commercial real estate and infrastructure projects, loans and guarantees to or participation into joint ventures or consortiums with Filipino and foreign investors, and other investments as may be approved by the board. As for governance, the MIC shall be governed by a board of directors with 15 members chaired by the Secretary of Finance. Other members include the CEO of the MIC, the President and CEO of Land Bank and DBP, 6 regular members representing the contributors to the fund, with the seats distributed in proportion to their corresponding investments, and 5 independent directors from the private sector, the academe, business sector, and investment sector. The rules on appointment and termination of the board of directors shall be included in the implementing rules and regulations. An advisory body will be established to advise and assist the board of directors in the formulation of the general policies related to investment and risk management. The advisory body shall not take part in the management or control of the fund. It shall be composed of the Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management, the Secretary of the National Economic and Development Authority, the President of the Philippine Stock Exchange, and the President of the Bankers Association of the Philippines. In addition, a risk management unit shall be organized by the board, which shall ensure that the MIC is taking the appropriate measure to achieve a prudent balance between risk and reward in both ongoing and new business activities. It shall be composed of 5 members. There will be 1 professional with proven competence and experience in finance, economics, investment, business management, or law, 2 senior executives of the MIC, 1 independent director, and 1 auditor. On exemptions and privileges, under the proposed bill, the MIC shall be granted exemptions from specific regulations to ensure operational efficiency and independence. The MIC shall be exempted from the GOCC Governance Act of 2011, except for sections of the said law on the fiduciary duties of the board and officers, full disclosure, and special audit. This is in consideration of the need for flexibility to operate, function, employ, and retain employees to ensure the successful implementation of the goals of the MIC. The following transactions and assets of the MIC and the MIF exempt from local and national taxes, direct and indirect, as well as custom duties include all funds, assets, and properties, all revenues, income, or investment earnings, as well as accruals thereto, the purchase of supplies, equipment, papers, or documents, and the importation of supplies and equipments. The exemptions granted shall be utilized directly, exclusively, and solely for the transactions of the MIC and the MIF as distinct legal entities and not for the purposes of its executives, employees, third parties, and other distinct taxable entities. Moreover, the procurement or engagement of the professional or technical services needed in the selection of authorized investments shall be exempted from the provisions of the Government Procurement Reform Act and its implementing rules and regulations. The competitive selection process and guidelines for the procurement of professional and technical services shall be approved by the MIC Board. To attract the highly qualified pool of Filipino professionals, both locally and overseas, the officers and employees of the MIC shall be exempt from the Salary Standardization Act. Their compensation shall be set based on an objective classification consistent with international standards for compensating investment management professionals managing global assets. On the distribution of net profits of the MIC, at least 25% shall be distributed for poverty and subsistence subsidies. The remainder shall be remitted to the national government for earmarking for social welfare programs and projects, excluding infrastructure projects, provided that the share of the net profits remitted to the national government shall not exceed the proportion of investments to the total fund attributable to the national government. Financial reporting and audit measures are also in place to ensure transparency and accountability. First, financial reporting shall be in accordance with the pertinent provisions of the Act, the IRR, and the International Financial Reporting Standards and Principles. Second, there will be an internal audit independent from the management of the MIC and shall be under the direct control and supervision of the Board of Directors. Third, there will be an internationally recognized auditing firm that shall serve as the external auditor of the fund to examine its financial statements. Fourth, the books and accounts of the MIC shall be subject to the examination and audit of the Commission on Audit. Fifth, there will be a joint congressional oversight committee composed of 5 members each from the House of Representatives and the Senate, which shall be tasked to oversee, monitor, and evaluate the implementation of this act. Your Honors, the Maharlika Investment Fund has the potential to contribute to the strong growth trajectory of the Philippines through investments in the country's critical developmental projects. Not only will this promote the effective intergenerational management of the country's financial resources, but more importantly, to improve the welfare of future generations of Filipinos. Ultimately, The Philippines will benefit from a well-structured, robust, and effective sovereign wealth fund, as this will serve as a long-term investment vehicle that will attract foreign investments, boost national savings, and advance economic growth and social development. As we support the creation of this measure, we shall continue to work hand in hand with Congress to ensure the passage of the best version of the Maharlika Investment Fund. Thank you, and maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Amy Marcos, and at the same time, I'd also like to recognize the governor of the BSP to make an opening statement, Dr. Felipe Medalla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Amy Marcos, Senator Chis Escudero, Senator Win Gatchalian, and Senator Cynthia Villar, and senators who are virtually present. I think they are Senators Poe, Binay, Revilla, Villanueva, and Angara. Good morning. The BSP supports the objectives of the Senate Bill number 1670, or the Maharlika Investment Fund Act, filed by Senator Mark Villar. The legislative measure proposes to establish an MIF, an independent fund that adheres to the principles of good governance, transparency, and accountability, and promotes economic development and other objectives to develop the economy. But in particular, we support the provisions that explicitly mentions the BSP. In particular, the contribution that the dividends declared by BSP, how the dividends of BSP will be disposed of, and them going to the sovereign wealth fund. This postpones the buildup of the capitalization of BSP, but at this point, our balance sheet is quite good, and we could easily take the postponement. We also support the provisions that say that we can extend regulatory relief. We may extend regulatory relief to the DBP and Land Bank of the Philippines. Some critics may say that it gives undue advantage to Land Bank and DBP relative to private banks. But one must be aware too that Land Bank and DBP are also quite restricted by their mandates and don't really directly compete very much with the private banks. So we do not see that as a major competition problem. So we thank the Senate for giving the BSP. Okay. So we thank. Okay, what's happening? Okay, we thank the Senate for giving the BSP the opportunity to share our insights on this landmark legislation. The BSP believes that this measure requires a whole-of-government approach, great focus, and proper implementation to achieve its objectives. Rest assured that the BSP will steadfastly fulfill its role in delivering its mandates, which we refer to as our three pillars. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our views on the MIF.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Governor Medalla. At this point, if there's no, I understand our resource persons would are willing to proceed to the discussion forum, unless there's someone who would still like to make an opening statement. No.
Mr. Chairman, can I be excused, Deputy Governor Dakila and Senior Assistant Governor Elmer Capule can actually answer many of the questions, if any.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
I'd also like to acknowledge at this point the presence of Senator Ontiveros.
Morning, Chair.
Good morning. And of course, online, Senator Pimentel. So thank you very much. At this point, we'd like to um, start the discussion proper, and the senators would be recognized in order of attendance. So please signify your attention to the secretariat if you would like to ask any questions. So I'd like to start by asking. I'd like you to start on a line of questioning regarding. Sorry, I'm sorry. She's here. Okay, sorry. Before we proceed, sorry, Secretary Pangandaman has an opening statement as well. So before we proceed, please proceed with the opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Again, Committee Chair, Senator Mark Villar, our good Senator, Senator Risa Ontiveros, Senator Francis Escudero, Senator Amy Marcos, Senator Win Gatchalian, and Senator Cynthia Villar. Good morning. And on behalf of Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman, we at the Department of Budget and Management thank you for this opportunity to share with you why, from the budget perspective, we believe that the Maharlika Investment Fund deserves to be considered for legislation. The economic team has been closely and thoroughly studying the costs and benefits of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Aside from our own research, we have also been consulting various financing and research institutions, such as the Milken Institute, which released its report just a few days ago. Based on the studies, it is our conclusion that the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund can truly help us achieve our agenda for prosperity.
Mr. Chairman, forgive me. Earlier, I inquired if there was going to be a singular presentation by the entire economic team with respect to the version they want to defend before this committee. I don't see the need really for each and every department to say that they're in favor of this measure, given that I presume that you are. Maybe request instead, forgive me, Yusek Basilio, to just submit to the committee members whatever individual position paper the respective members of the economic team may have. DBP has submitted, Land Bank has submitted for our consideration so as to save on time.
Thank you, Senator. You're correct. You mentioned earlier there is one presentation, although some of them, some departments signified their intention to make an opening statement, not a presentation. But nevertheless, I agree with your motion that we can submit. So if there's no objection, may we request that the respective resource persons and the departments they represent just submit their opening statements for the record, if that's acceptable to, unless there's no any objections. So that being said, the motion is carried. So at this point, we can proceed with the discussion proper, which again will be on order of arrival. So I'd just like to start. I have a few. I'd like to start, and I'd like to ask a few questions. My line of questioning is regarding the the foreseen benefits of the Maharlika bill. With the president, I was in a event recently where the president mentioned that there's a group of there's a small group of countries called the VIP that are, and that's Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, who are some of the economic, who are countries who are deemed as some of the economic tigers or upcoming strong economic countries. Can I ask if all of these three VIP, do they have a sovereign wealth fund currently?
Vietnam and Indonesia, they have sovereign wealth funds, Your Honor.
So we are the only ones without one. That's
Right
correct.
now, yes, sir.
Would you know any? Would you have any statistics on the performance of either of these funds, that whether it be Indonesia or Vietnam? Do we have any idea on
Can I
how
just
they?
speak on our record, sir?
Yes, yes, please.
Your Honor, in the case of Indonesia, it's called the Indonesia Investment Authority. So the initial capitalization was $5 billion. And right now, the assets under management is about 6.8 billion. The recorded net profits in 2021 was about 15.4 million dollars, but because it only started in 20, actual operations only started in 2021. But it was able to generate already co-investments in the amount of about 20.5 billion dollars.
$20 billion.
Yes.
These are from these are from other sovereign funds, or are they from private placements?
This included also, they were able to scale up their capital with partnerships from overseas global infrastructure funds as well, and of course, their own investments in their domestic markets.
So, in other words, these sovereign wealth funds were able to generate additional equity to be invested in local government, local projects, be it infrastructure or other investments.
You're correct, Your Honor.
Uh,
And if I may also add, not only in terms of additionality, in terms of capital, but of course the transfer of technology and knowledge in running, of course, the infrastructure fund itself, and of course in the development of the economy, and of course the implementation of infrastructure projects.
so, do you see the Maharlika Investment Fund as a means also to attract foreign capital, foreign equity in the Philippines?
Definitely, Mr. Chair. And just to cite an example, maybe there's a correlation because recently, when we issued our last sovereign bond, we were able to have an order book of $28 billion for an issuance of $2 billion. So that means that there's a lot of interest in the Philippines.
Just for the information of the public, what are the advantages of when we talk about equity versus debt? We can fund our projects through debt, which is of course borrowing, or equity. Maybe you can enlighten maybe the public also on the differences between equity and debt.
Of course, debt, sir.
Very briefly.
Sir, of course, in debt, we have to repay it. But in terms of the equity, they have the skin in the game, meaning to say they are in the project, in the investment itself. So it's a long-term horizon that they are also looking. But in the case of the Philippines, while we can also issue debt in the long in terms of long-term tenors, like the ones that we have issued before, it's in the tenor of 10 and 25 years, and we've seen a lot of appetite from overseas investing in the credit of the Philippines.
So
Mr.
if it's
Chair.
yes, yes, you.
Just a quick interjection, Mr. Chair, for the record, if
Okay,
I may.
sure.
Dahil nabanggit na rin po kanina ni National Treasurer De Leon yung Indonesian Sovereign Wealth Fund or yung INA, maybe it will be interesting to discuss later in the hearing or in future hearings. Among other important points, may mga importanteng pagkakaiba yung INA at saka yung proposed Maharlika Wealth Fund, particularly in terms of the composition of the boards at saka in terms of yung qualifications ng CEO at CIOO. So just for the record at this point in time, Mr. Chair. Salamat po.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I think that's a very good point that we can compare and see. At least we've had we can learn from their experience with their sovereign wealth fund. So thank you very much, Senator, and I think that'll be a very good point that as we tackle down the road. So continue my line of questioning. As you mentioned earlier, the difference very basic about equity and debt. So you're saying that this bill, in a way, will improve improve our fiscal situation in the country, as it will it could potentially reduce the debt that we would. From DPWH, I know we have foreign funded projects, so this could potentially reduce the debt of the Philippine government.
Tama po, because eventually, then there would also be some already, instead of the national government borrowing for these infrastructure projects, there can already be some take-up by the fund or some other private ventures would also be co-investing in the fund to be able to implement and execute these projects. Na otherwise, dapat po national government ang mag-i-implement.
That's good. I think that's a good point to establish that actually this can actually improve our fiscal situation. And it would allow us to have a mechanism to utilize debt instead of just borrowing and borrowing to finance a lot of our infrastructure projects. So I think that's a very good point. And I won't, of course, you know, I won't. There are a lot of people a lot of senators who have questions to ask. So I just like to end this line of questioning by
Mr.
asking.
Chairman, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, on this point, given the point raised by the chairman, if I may,
Yes, please.
make a brief interjection. One, Ma'am Leia, yung gain sa Indonesia Investment Fund, is it paper gain? Or did they actually realize the profit and use the money gained to invest in somewhere else?
No, realized gains po yun. So it's actual,
Realized meaning nalabas nila yung pera.
opo, nagamit at na-roll over pa po yung pera, nagamit pa po, napaikot po yung pera.
Second, a cursory reading of the bill, given the distinction between equity and debt raised by the chairman, wala akong nakita sa bill na may parte ang Land Bank at DBP or PAGCOR as corporations from the net profit. So essentially, para mong pinwera sa yung dalawang bangko, even PAGCOR, to give money, wala akong nakita sa bill na may share sila on their investment. So we're like hardballing Land Bank and DBP to give money to this fund without saying anything in the bill with respect to the return on their investment as a cost bago yung net profit na 25%, di ba, na ibibigay sa national government for social welfare projects, etc., etc. So if that is the case, given that the bill is silent, is this an interest-free borrowing from Land Bank and DBP? Unless, of course, ma'am, you will clarify later on that DBP and Land Bank should have a respectable ROI, given that you will be exempting them later on, as I understand, from BSP, from the capital regulatory requirements insofar as the investments of the bank are concerned. So would that be happening in the future, ma'am, as we go through this bill? Otherwise, it will be an interest-free debt.
Would you like to respond?
May, Mr. Chair, I think, well, maybe po yung sa bill would need further clarification. Kasi po yung carve out na 25% would really just accrue dun sa investment ng national government. Yung pong contribution. So definitely, eventually po, there would also be some dividends that would also be declared sa Land Bank, sa DBP because of their contributions to the fund.
Ma'am, the bill is completely silent on it. Shouldn't there be something written there already? In fact, even in the comments of DBP and Land Bank, they brought that up. Na walang sinasabing return sa kanila. Second, ma'am, the composition of the board itself does not reflect the capital contribution of the entities giving the money. Bakit may private sector isang boto? Bakit yung Secretary of Finance may isang boto? Although he chairs Land Bank, of course. Pero yung total na perang i-contribute, sabihin na natin 100 billion. If 50 billion came from Land Bank, hindi ba ordinary corporate governance as you want to use, 50% of the board should come from Land Bank, Kung 25% galing sa DBP, dapat 25% galing sa DBP. Hindi yung kung saan-saan hinugot na wala namang capital contribution. You're assuming the private sector will invest. You already gave private sector representation, but they're not yet investing. So again, ma'am, I'm trying to protect the interest of the bank here. I'm trying to figure out if this is really equity or we're simply forcing the hand of both DBP. Of course, they cannot say no. Both DBP and Land Bank cannot say no. But at some point in time, ma'am, we should give them something by way of return and ROI. Hindi naman pwedeng wala.
Senator, if I can, if I can also be permitted to finish my line of questioning. Yes. Yes. But I think Senator makes a very good point, perhaps regarding, what the expectations are regarding your investment in the funds, and that's something that should be clear. So before I continue my line of questioning, perhaps you can respond to Senator Escudero's question from the Land Bank and DBP perspective.
Okay.
Yes, please, ma'am.
Yeah. Good morning, Chairman Mark Villar. Good morning to the honorable senators. Actually, the point raised by Senator Escudero is part of our comments and the bill as your office requested for our comments. We actually suggest an Article 2, Section 6 of the draft bill to indicate the ROI of the return of our investment in the MIC or MIF as being contemplated. If it's not in absolute percent, maybe it should be like a formula or can be referenced to the current average ROI being already enjoyed by the bank from their regular investments.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Actually, this was going to go into my next question, which is I wanted to end my line of questioning with a request if we can have specifics on the returns, because we talk a lot about downside, but I want to know I want to know more or less what are our expectations in terms of the benefits of this the Maharlika Fund. You mentioned earlier about the other funds and what their performance was. I'd like to know if there are any statistics regarding or any projections regarding what sort of returns the government and the banks can hope to achieve from putting their money into Maharlika. Do we have any possible statistics regarding that? Yes, please proceed.
Mr. Chair, Your Honors, before to add and interject to the issues raised by Senator Escudero, Attorney Mortel from the GCG, the DBP and Land Bank are under our coverage. And I noticed that in the proposed bill in Section 30, it is also our concern that given the insights raised by Senator Escudero, DBP and Land Bank will be doing some explanation exactly what happened to their investment, because it will be part of their scorecards every given year. But in Section 30 of the 36 rather of the bill, I think it's somehow covered the same, but it has to make some further clarification, which explains that the profits and losses of the MIC shall be recognized in its books. So this provision can cover that part, but there will be a need to some guidelines to clarify the matter, Your Honor.
Thank you. So going back to my question also, do we have projections yet regarding that, or perhaps you can submit to the committee some financial projections for the Maharlika Fund? I mean, obviously, it's not, it's nothing set in stone, but I mean, perhaps projections on what sort of returns we can achieve. Also, recognizing, of course, that the difference between equity and debt is that there's really a fixed amount that you are committing to return. Of course, the risk appetite for equity is slightly higher, but of course, you have a share of the upside when that comes. So, I mean, recognizing that point that that is exactly the difference between equity and debt, is that debt guarantees a certain return, but you don't have a share of the upside, whereas equity, they do not guarantee a set return, but you have an upside in exchange for which you assume a little more risk. So, I mean, that's part of the risk management of any financial institution. So, I'll end this line of questioning by asking if you can submit some projections for the potential benefits of the Maharlika Fund for the country and for the investors who will be putting their money in there. So, thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge in order. So please, I call also for the Secretariat to take note of the points raised by Senator Escudero and Senator Ontiveros, so that we can also include these in our discussions and, of course, address these concerns as we deliberate the bill. So at this point, I'd like to recognize, in order of arrival, our esteemed senators. First, I'd like to recognize Senator Win Gatchalian. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm willing to yield to Senator Escudero. I think he made a good point, just not to disrupt the chain of thought of the discussion. So I'm
yes, Senator. Senator Escudero, Senator Gatchalian yields to you. So please, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Let me begin at the beginning. I just interjected on the point given earlier by the good chairman. I don't know who to address the question to. Since Leah, you made the presentation, can I address the questions to you? What is the main objective of this fund? I've heard so many things from so many people that has changed so many times. So once and for all, ano ba yung gusto nating objective dito? We generate earnings via the investment fund in order to do what? Please.
First of all, sir, of course, we want to do a lot of things sa national government. But right now, we are constrained because we have very limited resources. But we're saying also, now we can tap naman from other sources. So like in the case of Land Bank and DBP, right now they have these investable funds that we call. And that's about 1.3 trillion in the case of Land Bank. Ma'am Cecil, please correct me.
That's correct, Treasurer Leah. as
Yes,
of end
ma'am.
of the
I know
sector.
that.
Po, in the case of DBP, they have about 800 billion na investable funds. So we're just carving a very small portion of that. In the case of Land Bank po, less than 4%.
Ma'am, forgive me, ma'am. You're not answering my question.
Sir,
What is your objective? What do you want to accomplish when we invest these funds?
So we'd like to do more of the infrastructure projects. Of course, we have our PPP, we have also our national government projects.
Ma'am, to cut you short, the bill of Senator Villar says except infrastructure project. Nakalagay dito. Section 30.
Pwede sa investment, pwede sa
Yes, yung sa profits. Yung sa profits. I'm not talking about the investments yet. Yung kikitain natin dito, saan nyo gagamitin?
Yung kikitain, una po, yung una pong pondo, pwede pong gamitin for more infrastructure projects at hindi lang po infrastructure projects. But
No,
po,
yung pondo.
opo,
Yung kita.
yung ngayon po, dapat lilinisin muna natin to be able to provide for the contributions ng Land Bank at DBP.
Although wala pa ngayon sa bill, gagawin pa lang natin.
So medyo tatang para may balik po sa kanila. Ngayon po may sobra, and then of course yung pong sobra, 25% of that na nag-accrue sa national government contributions, ilalagay po natin for the social services, mga healthcare projects, and this could also be additional, no? Para at the same time, mas makakaluwag po sa budget, sa fiscal space po natin ng national government.
Ma'am, social welfare projects, it says in section 35, excluding infrastructure projects.
Hindi po.
So yung kita, hindi gagastusin sa infrastructure. Puro social welfare lahat ng kita.
25%, sir, na kina-carve out. Yung po ilalagay sa social projects, sa mga social amelioration projects natin.
Yung balanse,
Yung balancing
na 75%,
ng MIC, pwede pong retained earnings na po yun, di ba, ng MIC.
hindi ko alam. Hindi nakalagay dito.
Magiging retained earnings. Sir, sa ordinary business operations that will form part of the retained earnings. So, pwede po yung paikutin para then it can again be leveraged para magkaroon po ng mga co-investments, ng joint ventures.
Ma'am, nakalagay po sa section 35, doon pa lang muna tayo. 25% of the net profits shall be for poverty alleviation projects, provided the remainder of the net profits shall be remitted to the national government, earmarked for social welfare programs, excluding infrastructure projects. So, that seems to counter what you're saying, that 25% of net profits will be for social amelioration projects, and the remaining 75 is retained. Ang sinasabi po dito, the remaining of the net profits shall be remitted to the national government. Walang sinasabing retained earnings po sa section 35.
Siguro, sir, baka that is something that we need to clarify in the bill. Kasi po, definitely, sir, hindi naman po pwedeng lahat kung hindi po contributions ng national
Agree.
government po yun, mapupunta pa sa national government.
Agree.
So, I'm sure meron pong other co-investors that they would also want to get their money back.
Forgive me, ma'am. I'm basing my questions on the bill itself and not on what is not written on the bill. If you seek to add to it later on, then perhaps
Yes, sir.
the economic team can suggest the corresponding changes to address these concerns. Now, on the actual fund, net profits tayo kanina eh. Saan natin i-invest? Securities?
Pwede po. Meron pong listing dito, yung allowable investments.
Nakita ko nga.
Opo.
Securities, bonds, di ba?
Opo. And infrastructure projects.
Now, we're headed into a recession worldwide, globally. Are you considering that point? Are we headed towards a recession globally?
Well, meron pong analysts saying na there would be recession in some of the advanced countries. But in the case of the Philippines, our view is that will not be in that position.
Yes, ma'am, but globally nga,
Po,
we will
yes,
be
sir.
affected by the recession that's looming and coming. Now, that's not necessarily bad because in a recession, ika nga, kung may bloodbath sa stocks, now is the time to buy. Why not? Now is a good time to invest. But my question, ma'am, is when will we reap the benefits? Usually, if stocks are low, then it takes about, in a recession, global recession, it'll take about 2 to 3 years to recover. So, kikita tayo in 2 to 3 years kung mag-invest tayo sa stocks. Now, when you talk of bonds, when you talk of debt instruments, again, if we discuss it later on, DBP and Land Bank would want their respective ROI. I think it's DBP that owns the ERPs to MRT, right? Both? And you're earning how much? 18?
12% this time.
Overall.
So, if it's at 12%, and I presume, magkano yung portfolio nyo? Magkano ang ROI nyo sa portfolio nyo for the past year? Ballpark.
Our investment portfolio, Senator Escudero, is 1.3 trillion. And our average return on that investment in 2022 was 3.73%.
3.76. And at the part of,
73.
ang liit naman, 3.76?
Sir.
73.
Ilan? 3.76 on the part of DBP?
Your Honor, on the part of DBP, it's close to 7%.
7%?
Return on equity, sir.
Yes. My question, ma'am, is if you ask now DBP, at the very least, that will be their basis. So isn't that like borrowing from them to the tune of the guaranteed supposed rate of return on their investment in other investments? So whether it's at 3.7 or 7%, so as not to be unfair to them, di ba? We should guarantee at the very least roughly those amounts. Kahit habaan pa natin yung period for the last 5 years, last 3 years, and let's average it off. At the very least, can that be placed in the bill? To
Sir.
be fair to them.
Yeah. Actually, sir, if they invest it in the GS right now at 5 years tenor, it's about almost 6%. So, yun pa lang
Even
po,
higher.
panalo na sila.
Ngayon, sa PAGCOR, wala naman silang ini-investan, di ba? Puro out yun eh. Yan, pwede kang maglaro siguro ng ROI nila. But insofar as Land Bank and DBP is concerned, we have to give them a respectable rate of return guaranteed based on the, pwede nga, sabi mo nga, pwede sa GS, 6% at the very least. Would that be fair?
Yes. Yes po, dahil GS lang, very conservative.
Yes, exactly. Next question, ma'am. Mr. Chair, I'll just have 3 points. We will have several hearings anyway. Next question, ma'am. I discussed this earlier. Paano yung composition ng board? Bakit isa lang ang representative ng Land Bank kung ang target natin is 100 billion? Ano ba yung capitalization na tinitingnan nyo ng Maharlika Investment Fund? How much is the capitalization?
Sir, for the seed, so meron pong 75 billion from DBP and Land Bank. Tapos po, right now, if we will just base it on dun sa BSP, yung first 2 years nila, and base if it's the dividend last year of about 17 billion, tapos po, meron pong PAGCOR na yung, again, if we base it on the dividend, so more or less mga 100 billion po, 100 billion pesos.
Ma'am, I agree with the more or less 100, but we are organizing this corporation by virtue of a law, not under the corporation code. Right, ma'am?
Tama po.
Hindi ba dapat may capitalization yung batas? This does not have any. It simply talks of the contribution of Land Bank, of DBP, 10% ng PAGCOR, baka may mag-invest ng private sector. I mean, that it's a law, it's not an excuse not to have a capitalization, authorized capitalization requirement. The bill does not, both versions, both the House and the Senate. So what would be, para kung mag-i-increase tayo ng capitalization, di ba? Hindi yung decision lang ng board, hindi naman IRR lang. Like with any other corporation, they should go through the process since this is mandated by law, i-amend yung batas just like the BSP charter. Di ba, nung nag-increase tayo ng capitalization ninyo, we had to amend the law. The same is true here. Kindly provide for a specific authorized capital of the MIF. And going to the composition, kung 100 billion yung nalagay nyo, ma'am, Land Bank 50 billion, again, Attorney Mortel, I think, will agree with me that if the capital contribution of Land Bank is 50%, prudence and practice to protect their investment would dictate that 50% of the members of the board should come. Ganun naman yung korporasyon, di ba? 50% ng kapital galing sa akin, 50% ng board akin.
Section 9.
25% ng kapital galing sa DBP, 25% galing sa kanila. Where did this formula come from? Now, if you want proper corporate governance, hindi ba tama lang na land bank should have the proportional representation in the board to their investment so that they can protect their investment? Same is true for DBP, same is true for PAGCOR, same is true for private individuals. In fact, you allocated already representation for future private investors na wala pa naman silang binibigay na pera. Why will they have one vote similar to Land Bank who contributed 50 billion? Isn't that, to say the least, unfair? Isn't that going against basic corporate governance and practice? Ma'am, please.
Sir, sa Section 19 po, nakalagay, so we have yung 15-member board, yung Secretary of Finance, tapos po yung CEO na MIC, yung President, tapos yung Land Bank and DBP, and there would be 6 regular members representing the contributors to the fund, which are really Land Bank and DBP, in accordance with the proportion of their corresponding investments. So baka...
Ma'am, sa 6 lang nag-a-apply yung proportional contribution nila, hindi sa 15? Ganun ba yan? Unang beses ko yata makarinig ng korporasyon na ganyan. Na meron kang cap kung ano, saan mag-a-apply lang investment. Now, let's take your word for it. For example, kung 50% ang Land Bank, 25% ang DBP, to understand saan ang galing yung hindi natin sinunod sa isang korporasyon, yung capital contribution ng investors. And since we do not know yet how much the 10% of PAGCOR will be, bibigyan mo pa sila ng share doon sa 6. And then the private sector are given 5. You don't even know. I mean, sige, may independent director, but may academe. Nagbigay ba si academe? Si private sector na pipiliin niyo, kung sino man negosyante siya, nagbigay ba siya? Did he invest? There must be some rhyme and reason behind it, why we're choosing the people to sit there. The Secretary of Finance sits as the chairperson. May contribution ba ang national government? Or counted na yung contribution ng Land Bank that he chairs as, I mean, no, I don't know nga. Is that how you look at it? I don't know.
Percent owned po ng DBP, ng national government, ang DBP at ang Land Bank.
So, ika-count ko siya. So, you have 8 out of 15 coming from Land Bank, DBP. Kung binibilang ko Secretary of Finance, it's still not 75%. My question is, shouldn't it reflect the capital contribution? Mr. Mortel, sir?
Good morning, Your Honors. I will venture to provide my insights on this. I think the issue is cropping up because of the treatment of the kind of entity created. Here it would appear, because it is an MIC, it would appear that it is a corporation. And that having so, the question of Senator Escudero perhaps is on the reflection if it is treated as a stock corporation. But if the entity is treated as a government entities with corporate body, then their submission could perhaps be accommodated. But not if the creation is entirely on the treatment of the same being a corporation. That's my submission, Your Honor.
My presumption, sir, is that's why we're exempting them in the salary standardization law, the GCG law, we're exempting them from everything. Payment of taxes, procurement law. The intention is for this company to operate as a private entity. That the principles of business would apply to this corporation and should therefore reflect to the corresponding interest and stakeholding of the contributors to the fund. Otherwise, it will be just like BSP. Created by law, kami nagpangalan ng lahat, national government nagko-contribute, okay lang. So, may I ask, Ma'am Lea, so is Attorney Mortel correct? Ang tingin nyo rito, hindi ordinaryong korporasyon, we will not treat it as a corporation, and yet you said in the proposed bill, you will treat this as an ordinary corporation wherein the rules of corporate governance would apply. Ma'am?
Given that the contributions are coming also from the state-owned enterprises, and eventually there will also be contributions from the national government, as we have cited from the proceeds of privatization, from some of the proceeds of the fiscal regime of the mining sector. So eventually, tama po, magiging GOCC po siya. But we are asking for the exemptions from the GCG, from the salary standardization, from the Government Procurement Act. So it will be running on a commercial basis.
So hybrid siya, ma'am? Ma'am, forgive me, ma'am.
Ganon din po kasi yung formulation sa corporations like Temasek, even like sa Indonesia. So ganon din po yung structure niya.
Yes, ma'am. But there are distinctions between Temasek and INA in relation to what we are proposing here. So just to clarify, so you're seeking to create a hybrid corporation that has all the benefits of a government entity, exemptions sa salary standardization, exemptions sa procurement law, exemptions sa payment of taxes, both national and local, which will wreak havoc, by the way, because when they invest in stocks and buy and sell stocks, ang hirap i-track nun, ha? But anyway, we will go there at another time. But, and when you buy and sell properties too, government bonds, etc., etc. But anyway, my point is, getting all of those benefits and yet not being treated as a business entity that can function as if it were a private venture.
Mr. Chair, with the indulgence of Senator Escudero.
Is it with the, if it's okay with Senator, yes, please proceed.
Yes.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. Salamat, Sen. Escudero. Quick interjection lang po. Nabanggit na naman yung INA. In the case of INA, ang board po nila 5 individual lamang. Tapos ang advisory board nila 5. And lastly po, in the sa questioning ni Sen. Escudero, sinabi po ni Attorney Mortel ng GCG, baka ituturing ito or itinuturing itong Maharlika na government entity with a corporate body. So just for the record, Mr. Chair, and with all due respect to the Chair, kaya nga po in plenary, although nag-rule na dito ang ating ang plenary, kaya po ni-raise ni Minority Leader yung matter of the referral of the bill. Kaya po pinost niya at that point in time na baka sa Government Corporations Committee. Kasi po kung hindi malinaw din, Mr. Chair, ang executive, kung anong animal itong Maharlika, nakakalito pati sa atin dito sa Senado. So just for the record, Mr. Chair, and then again with all due respect. Salamat po, Mr. Chair. Salamat, Sen. Escudero.
Thank you. Please proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Give me a couple of minutes, Mr. Chairman. Now, let's talk about the exemption sa GCG. May I ask why? Essentially, the GCG reviews whoever you will appoint in the board.
Yes, Your
Now you created an advisory body to make the corresponding recommendations sans the GCG. May I ask why? How will the operation of MIF be hindered if the appointments to the board go through GCG? The usual course, if it is indeed a GOCC. Anong problema ba ng GCG na ayaw niyong padaanin sa kanila? What will be hindered if it goes through GCG? I understand, DBP, dumadaan sa GCG, di ba? Land Bank, same. So, ano yung hindi nyo magagawa o makukuha kung dumaan sa GCG kaya ayaw nyo? What's the logic behind it, ma'am?
Siguro po, given yung experience ng mga government corporations namin in terms of yung pagpapadaan sa GCG, dahil sa dami rin po ng ine-evaluate nila, yung due diligence po nila, so medyo nagkakaroon lang po ng time consuming. But if it would just be through the advisory body na ang composition naman po ang ating Department of Budget and Management Secretary, ang NEDA Secretary, so there also would be in a best position to be able to have a determination of who should sit dun po sa board.
Ma'am, if it's only time that you're concerned about, I would presume that the GCG is really busy at the beginning of any administration. It's been 6 months. Halos na fill up na halos lahat ng government corporations. Kung may backlog man sila, tapos na yon. So it's only time. So we include as part of the bill. I-prioritize nila to. I mean, if it's only the delay that you're afraid, I'm telling you already, the bill will be delayed because there are so many gaps and loopholes in the bill. So the GCG will have time. You can already start processing some of the names as soon as it is approved. What else, ma'am? Because I wonder why you don't want the GCG to go through the nominees. I presume all of these will be via a letter of intent signed by the president. It will go through the advisory board. The advisory board cannot just take up applications from whoever, di ba? As it is with the GCG. May letter of intent, ang Secretary of Finance, ang Presidente, depende sa korporasyon, which the GCG will process, and if they approve it, then the appointment or the designation will be affected. So why else, ma'am? Aside from the time constraint, bakit nyo ayaw dumaan sa GCG? Anong ayaw nyo sa GCG kung bakit nyo ayaw padaanin? Aside from the time.
Hindi lang, if I may, Your Honor, hindi lang po kasi naman in terms of the nominations to the board ang ginagawa ng GCG. Marami rin po silang ginagawa, evaluating po yung performance scorecard and the like, no? So maraming preoccupation na might also delay in terms of the nominations to the board for the Maharlika Fund. And we see naman po with this, the advisory committee, na they would be in a best position to be able to know who should really the best minds to be able to make the MIC function very well. So yun po yung rationale behind bakit hindi na lang po dadaan sa GCG.
The main reason why GCG has a permanent term is to guarantee independence. All of the people you're mentioning, DBM, DOF, and EDA, are all coterminous with the president and serve at his pleasure. They're all coming from one side. In fact, the main reason why GCG is there is to provide a different and separate perspective. Dahil wala naman sigurong isang tao nagmamayari ng lahat ng talino, galing at magandang intensyon para sa bansa, di ba? Maganda rin mapakinggan yung iba. And the same is true here. If you really want this MIF to succeed, the more heads that are participating in crafting policies and being a part of it, I think it would be better and best than simply all coming from one and the same group, all obeying the command and will of the president because they're all coterminous with the president and serve at his pleasure, unlike the GCG. Moving to the next point, ma'am. Why exemption from the procurement law? Including purchase of, ano bang papers yung sinasabi niyo exemption? Pati supplies niyo, exempted sa procurement law? Papel, stapler, ribbon, computer.
I think ang sinasabi po sa procurement law are technical services. Yung pong pag-e-evaluate, like if they're going to get po yung fund managers, so that would be exempted from the Government Procurement Act.
It did not specify here. It simply gave a blanket exemption sa procurement law. Again, I'm talking about purchase of supplies, not only fund managers. I'm talking about purchase of vehicles. I'm talking about rental or purchase of a building or rental of a building or office space. I'm talking of almost everything and anything. Would you change it later on, ma'am, to specify?
Siguro po, there would have to be some clarity. Pero po sa Section 32, nakalagay po doon yung engagement of professional or technical services needed in the selection of investments as authorized in this act, such as fund management, investment, etc. po.
I agree, ma'am. Pero hindi nga in-specify kung anong kasama. Exempted lang. So yun lang ba ang intention nyo? So we will specify that.
I
Ngayon lang.
understand po, maybe from the Government Procurement Act, GPB.
Yes, ma'am. GPPB?
Yes, sir. Good morning po, Mr. Chair, as well as the honorable members of this committee. I'm Maria Ginesha Guillermo.
Ma'am, sit there, ma'am.
Thank you.
Para hindi kayo naka...
Sorry. Kawawa naman. Hindi naman niya hindi niya trabaho.
Yes, ma'am. So what's the intention here? Saan lang exempted ang MIF?
Thank you very much, sir, for that question. Actually, it is not, the RA 9184 is still applicable as a general rule for any procurement activity of the MIC. We only have provided an exemption, particularly in the engagement of technical and research services. The reason why is because we wanted them to just give them the opportunity to really be able to forge their agreement, contractual arrangement with the service provider. But however, we have made a specific requirement wherein it should be that the board should come up with the approved guidelines in the selection process for this fund or research technical services, sir.
Ma'am, under pa rin ng COA to, di ba?
Yes po.
So ano magiging basis ng COA to say, mali to, hindi tama to?
Of course, sir, we would look into it as part of the requirement pa rin po when they would specify po yung specific na criteria when they would be engaging with the research or the technical services provider po.
Ma'am, in this changing world, there are already consultants that subscription na lang naman yun eh. Subscribe ka sa mga, di ba, sa report ng kung sino, Bloomberg, kung sino man, di ba? Okay lang naman yun eh. Hindi naman issue yun eh, di ba?
Yes, sir.
Now, other procurement activities of the MIF, subject to the procurement law?
Yes, sir.
So when they buy a piece of property,
Then it is still procurement law, sir. As long as we have qualified there, sir, that it is only exempted insofar as the engagement of technical or research service providers po.
I presume pagbili nila ng bonds, ng certificates of indebtedness, securities, wala lahat yon, di ba? Wala naman procurement law yun eh.
There is still a procurement law, sir, because in general, we have...
Paano ma'am? Let's say bumaba isang share of stock, gusto nilang bumili. Bukas, paano procurement law yun?
There's, as far as we are...
What's the process, ma'am?
As far as when it comes to all procurement transactions of the MIC, sir, it is still imperative that RA 9184 would be applied.
So what does RA 9184 say with respect to the purchase of shares of stock? Ano yung proseso, ma'am?
Of course, sir, as far as you shares of stock, of course, this is still subject to the corporation code, sir. And then as far as the procurement side of it, it is not under the purview po ng RA 9184.
So hindi nga kasama.
Yes, sir.
Hindi siya kasama. Pati pagbili ng government security, both
No.
foreign and local. Hindi kasama.
Hindi po.
Pagbili ng real property, kasama.
Yes, sir.
Do you make a distinction between an investment in a listed company and investment in a company that's not listed?
May we just look into it, as since we are referring to stocks, I think we have to apply the corporation code pa rin po, sir. So it's not necessarily
No,
po.
ma'am. No, ma'am. We're talking about procurement rules, procedures, and laws.
Yes po.
Is there a distinction between MIC, MIF investing or buying shares of stock from a listed company compared to MIC, MIF investing in a company that's not listed?
There's no distinction, sir.
Hmm? You sure, ma'am?
Sir, this is insofar as the procurement law is concerned, sir.
Ma'am, may kumpanya ako, tinatakot ko sila. Hoy, bili kayo ng share, mag-invest kayo sa kumpanya ko. Ni walang nakakaalam kung ano yung laman ng kumpanya ko. Hindi, unlike a company that's listed in the stock market, well, it goes through several checks.
Yes, sir.
So, walang distinction from the point of view of 9184?
We are particularly looking at, sir, may I just check my notes, sir, is as far as investments are concerned, sir, this is not within the purview po kasi ng RA 9184.
Ma'am, you're with GPPB, di ba?
Yes, sir.
Submit to us, ma'am, the implications
Yes.
na lang
Yes,
under
sir.
9184 of the possible activities that MIC, MIF will be undertaking, assuming it is created into law.
Yes, sir.
Please, ma'am. Last point, Mr. Chairman, for this so that others can be given a chance. Now, Ma'am Lea, I'd like to take up tax exemptions. Exempt from local and national taxes, direct, indirect, National Internal Revenue Code, Local Government Code, all funds, assets, and properties, all revenue, income, investment earnings, as well as accruals thereto, purchase of supplies, equipment, papers, or documents. Exempted lahat? Does Land Bank or DBP enjoy the same? From Land Bank?
No, sir.
What kind of exemption do you enjoy from national and local taxes? Any?
None, Your Honor.
DBP?
None po, Your Honor.
Is this the first of its kind, Ma'am Lea? No, I don't know. Perhaps PAGCOR is, or NAPOCOR used to be to a certain degree, but
Yes.
The intention na lang, sir. Because the intention is that given that foregone taxes to be paid, it will go back to the fund. So, iikot po yung pondo ng pera, mas mapapalago, mas magagamit. So, I think that was the intention behind it.
I agree, ma'am, but you've been the National Treasurer for quite some time. You've seen the policy of previous Secretaries of Finance, regardless of administration. It's easier to have a uniform rule applicable to all than to create exemptions because it will wreak havoc on the system. You yourself said, it will go to government anyway. Diba? Doc stamps, babayaran. Final tax sa sale ng on income, sale ng shares of stock, gobyerno pa rin pupunta. Capital gains tax, documentary stamp tax, transfer tax, gobyerno naman lahat pupunta yan. So, why wreak havoc by exempting this entity? And again, I think this is the first time that, to my knowledge, na merong entity ganito ka lawak yung exemption na binibigay natin, when in fact, it will just simply go from one pocket to another of government. So if you want to preserve the fund, then we can put here, and then all taxes paid shall be reverted back to the company by way of additional investment of the national government. But let them pay the taxes in the ordinary course. Di ba, ma'am? Mas simple yan. Kindly consider it, ma'am. Because you will have encountered several problems. Purchase of supplies, equipment, papers, documents. Biglang tax exempt, exempt sa duties, exempt lahat. Ma'am, magulo yun, ha? Magulo siya. And it will be a gaping loophole insofar as entities selling to the MIF, MIC is concerned because they will claim it's sold to them even if it is not and claim the exemption. Not MIC, MIF, the entity selling. Kindly consider that too, ma'am. Mr. Chair, I will yield to our other colleagues. given that I'm sure they have other questions as well, I will await the reply and the feedback and the submissions and position papers from the economic team headed by Ma'am Leia and as well as from the GPPB for me to continue with my interjections and interpolations on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that very good line of questioning. I was hearing the reply regarding RA 9184. I think with regards to the purchase of stock, just for clarification, I think that would be it would not be considered a purchase because that's actually a shift in assets. So it's as if you decided from cash to stock. It's not actually a though it is a purchase technically. It's not a purchase. It's a shift in asset composition. Just for I think that would be the more relevant. That would be the more relevant point with regards to the GPPB. It's not a purchase. It's a shift in asset composition of the GOCC. Would that be correct? Am I correct in making that assumption? Just for clarification.
Yes, sir. There's just a shift in the composition of the
And
asset.
I just want to make sure because stocks are not should not be under R1 RA9. That's definitely not. I just want to make that clear. So it should not because it's not a actual purchase, though it seems to take that nature. But it's a shift in asset composition. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, may nakalimutan lang ako.
Yes.
Next time, may I request, can the committee and the chairman require that the Secretary of Finance himself attend?
Yes. Thank you. That's a very
To be asking Ma'am Leia, who is the National Treasurer, these
Yeah,
questions. And she's a member of the future board of the MIF. You're not, di ba?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Senator. They were really support. In fact, the habol pa daw sila, di ba? They just had a emergency meeting and they asked for begged our indulgence. So, but I understand they will be coming.
But do we even have one representative from the Department of Finance?
Yes, we do.
Sir?
Mr. Chair.
ASEC.
Sir, sorry, kindly convey to Secretary Jokno, I thought this was important to them. And they wanted us to rush this.
Yes.
They wanted us to do this and facilitate its passage. The least we would require would be their presence. I'm not diminishing your position, ASEC, but kung ano mang emergency yun, siguro naman mahalaga din naman to so that questions can be answered and not simply passed on. And he will be the chairman of the MIF.
Yes, thank you, Sen. We share your opinion and we express this to them. That's why they said there will be immediately after their meeting they'll be rushing here. So we expect them soon. And for future, we will continue to emphasize that point for future meetings that we will require them to show them so that we can expedite also the bill. Thank you very much. At this point, we'd like to. Where's your list go? Would you like to? Yeah. At this point, nasan yung list? Senator Sherwin has a few questions. Senator Win Gatchalian has a few questions. So the chair recognizes Senator Gatchalian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll keep this very simple so that everyone will be abreast and understand the issues surrounding and topics and concepts surrounding the Maharlika investment funds. I'll start off with the investments. I understand, Secretary Treasurer Leah. I'll point this question to you because I think you're the point person for this. The fund has two objectives, correct? Development and commercial. No? And the development is meant to invest in projects that is meant to spur economic development through infrastructure and others. No? Can you cite some examples on the development or strategic objective of the fund? Just give us an examples of those.
Well, of course, sir, infrastructure projects. We also are looking into investments in fintech, healthcare, also in renewable energy, so the like.
I'll go to to your specific examples, like infrastructure, what's the difference between um, the Maharlika Fund and the GAA? No? Um, the infrastructure component of the GAA is almost at 1 trillion pesos, correct? If you add school buildings, roads, if you add farm to market roads, that will amount more than 1 trillion pesos. This is about 75 billion pesos, no, in terms of capitalization. So you have you have 1 trillion pesos in the GAA, you have 75 billion. What's the difference? No? We're doing it right now anyways with that more money. So why are we putting 75 billion pesos, which is a small amount compared to the GA, to this fund and exert a lot of effort in doing so?
Yes, sir. Actually, it's all about leveraging. Kasi sir, di ba, in terms of the GAA, we are constrained because we have a very huge deficit. We cannot add more to the pressures, fiscal pressures of the budget. But now we have this contribution, since kahit lang po 75 billion siya, then we can be able to co-invest with other investors in this kind of projects, would have interest in this kind of projects, even getting also investments offshore. At the same time, we'd also benefit from the as I've said, yung pong transfer of technology and knowledge, because with these investments po, now with the co-investments, there would be other participation from global investors in infrastructure projects who would have been there and have already the experience in implementing these kind of projects.
So the objective is to multiply that 75 billion. Hopefully, we can get other investors to co-invest, meaning increase the capitalization of or increase the investable amount of the fund. No? What is the target? Have you already talked to potential co-investors? Because if that is the case, no, I can appreciate, no, the direction of the MIF. Have you talked to investors and see how much can we multiply the 75 billion? Because in my mind, 75 billion is quite, actually, to be honest, 75 billion for infrastructure is not so big. No? You're talking about the subway is about what, 500 billion pesos already? No? So 75 billion is not substantial in terms of infrastructure. For school building as alone, we need 400 billion pesos already. No? So, but if you are saying that we can multiply this, no? Then how much are we looking at in terms of multiplying this investable amount?
If you can just benchmark it with the experience po nung Indonesia Fund again, so they were able to get commitments po from other sovereign wealth funds, from global investors, to the tune of about $20 billion. Yung kung kanilang actually $5 billion na infusion ng ng government of Indonesia, they were able to go to get commitments amounting to about 20 billion and more so in terms of other commitments and pledges to co-invest with the fund.
Okay, so that's I'll keep it simple, yeah, and just to make everyone understand. So we can actually quadruple the amount. That's a possibility.
Yes, sir.
So a 70 billion investment can go as high as, let's say, 300 billion in terms of the investable.
In commitments po, opo.
In commitments, and that's what we're looking at.
Yes, sir.
No? And so far, how's the reception of? I know that the DOF went on a roadshow after the Davos event. What is the reception? Can you give us a preview of the reception to this proposal?
During the roadshow, well, I would speak siguro po for yung sa experience in London and Frankfurt, because part of the presentation made by Secretary Diokno was also to already talk about the Maharlika Investment Fund. And there's good reception, but obviously, sir, they'd like to know more kasi we're also crafting pa lang the legislation. So they would also want to see how they, as foreign investors, would be able to participate in the fund. Pero what I can say is that there's already that interest that we are able to stimulate.
All right. we're talking about investors, no? And we're trying to attract investors also to participate in the fund. And how do we plan to attract potential investors to the fund? What are the selling points that we can offer? Because I'm trying to compare this, let's say, to a PPP project. No, there's options for this investors. Eh. So how do you plan to attract them to join the fund?
Um, Again, sir, I would say na, first of all, thanks to Congress, you have already enacted yung pong economic liberalization measures with the Public Services Act, the opening of the economy, and then of course, the even in terms of the Philippine development plan that we have right now, and also the listing that we have in terms of the medium-term investment framework that we have. So all this already more or less would be framework for the investors to see where they can come in terms of our priority sectors, how we are also trying to already prioritize our renewable energy, our in terms of the sustainability programs that we have. So these are some things, some of the interests that we'll be able to showcase to the investors. And we also know na investors on their end, they also have buckets in terms of they would want to invest, the priority sectors that they would want to invest. Like in our case, when we did our sustainability bonds, marami hong pumasok in the long end of the curve, no? So to speak, in the same manner, there's a wash of liquidity, and we'd like to tap that liquidity to be able to come into the economy, given that we have now opened with the Public Services Act, and of course with this Maharlika investment fund that we are now establishing.
Will the tax exemption be a source of attraction for them? Because I also saw the same question with Senator Escudero. I also saw that it will be exempted from all revenues, income. I would assume these are CIT, investment earnings. I would assume these are doc stamps and others. They'll all be exempted. So in other words, this is a sort of an investment for them to come in.
Sorry po. It will be a magnet, given that obviously, sir, mas malalaki po ang kanilang income with this kind of exemptions that we are also providing. But at the same time, hindi lang naman pupunta po yung sa investors, but it would also accrue to the fund.
Yeah, but are we giving, isn't it we are giving undue advantage to private investors coming into these funds? I mean, if private investors will go to a normal mutual fund or a ETF, they pay all of these taxes. But with this fund, number one, they don't pay any taxes. And then number two, aren't we skewing the returns also? Because a normal fund will pay all of these taxes, income tax, doc stamps, and all that. So merong MIF who is highly attractive because it's not paying taxes and it's attracting private funds, and you have another set of funds who pay the same, who perform the same function but pay a lot of taxes. So aren't we in a way skewing profits, meaning we're not reflecting the true cost of capital because we're exempting taxes from these funds? In other words, we're inflating profits because we're not paying taxes. Hindi ba unfair advantage ho yan?
Yung pong exemption is really on the fund itself. Yung pong income, bawa if there would be a private sector that would also gain more, then that would have to be declared by him as a corporate income tax.
Correct, but the fund itself, di ba? Obviously, the fund will not pay, I would assume, income tax, correct? So that income tax will now form part of its profits.
Yeah, so it would be retained.
It will be retained or it can be declared. Bahala na in board, di ba? But it will be part of its returns, correct? As part of its computation. So my point there is, it's not reflecting the true cost because taxes are cost eh. These are business costs to the entity, but we're not reflecting that. And then mag-a-attract tayo ng private sector. Hindi ba unfair naman that the private sector coming to the fund enjoys tax-free profits versus entities that are being charged with taxes?
We do see your point, Senator, so that's something that we can look
Maybe we
into.
can look at that also. Why I'm trying to level the playing field because there are other mutual funds there. There are a lot of ETFs, there are a lot of mutual funds, there are a lot of different types of funds out there, but they're not enjoying the same tax benefits as this one. So in the private sector, obviously pupunta dito, no? Because they have that advantage.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I may, with the indulgence of Sen. Gatchalian.
Please, is it with yeah, okay, please, yes, proceed.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. Salamat, Sen. Gatchalian. Quick interjection lang po. Sabi nga po ni National Treasurer De Leon, benchmarking with INA, gusto nyo pong i-leverage yung initial fund para sana tulad ng Indonesia, may mag-co-invest, matriple yung halaga ng pondo. Pero again, Mr. Chair, may mga importanteng pagkakaiba yung ina ng Indonesia at yung proposed Maharlika Fund. Halimbawa po sa Indonesia, meron silang significant windfalls sa petroleum at saka sa mining na in recent years, nag-shoot up talaga yung commodity prices doon. At saka yung ina, hindi lang kasi yung size ng fund yung naging attractive, pero meron na po silang portfolio ng mga GOCC infrastructure and mining investment projects na even at the time of the launch of INA, meron ng healthy stream of incomes. Pero kumpara sa atin dito, Mr. Chair, wala pa po tayong ganyang portfolio ng revenue earning infrastructure or mining projects for that matter. So just for the record, Mr. Chair, at para mas clear-eyed po tayo sa pagkakaiba ng konteksto ng Indonesia noon at tayo ngayon. Salamat, Mr. Chair, at salamat muli, Sen. Gatchalian.
Thank you, Senator Risa. I'll jump to another topic, Mr. Chairman, with your permission. I received this position paper of DBP, and I think DBP is here, no? And there's a suggestion here, and let me just read it from your position paper. The funds invested by the GFI shall carry a zero risk weight and shall not be deducted from the GFI's regulatory capital in the computation of the applicable risk-based capital adequacy ratio based on BSP manual regulations for banks. It shall also be exempted from any regulatory restriction if invested solely in the MIF. Can you explain this suggestion from the DBP?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, bank GFIs are subject to regulatory ratios. And when we invest, it decreases the amount of capital. No? And when the capital is reduced, then it's possible that we will breach those ratios. And so if it is exempt, then it will not affect our ability to carry out our mandate and lend.
Basically, what you're saying is if you invest in MIF, it should be risk-free.
Yes, Your Honor.
But is that fair? Because the MIF is not risk-free.
Your Honor, if the ability of the bank to carry out its mandate and lend will be constrained by investing in the MIC, then we will not be able to.
Yeah, but this is basically what you're suggesting. If I invest in the MIF or put money in the MIF, it should be treated as risk-free.
Yes, Your Honor.
So that it will not impair my capital.
Yes, Your Honor.
But the MIF is not risk-free.
And that's why we are requesting for the regulatory relief, sir.
So in other words, you're finding cover for your investments.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, but that's not. It's not. First of all, that's not fair, no? Because all investments have risk, and we cannot just isolate you from risk because this is an investment vehicle. So there's upside and downside. That's number one, and then number two, assuming this is carried, then it will affect the stability of the bank because you're again not reflecting the true risk of the investment. You're not reflecting the true um, quality of the investment.
Your Honor, the bank has investments which are already considered risk-free as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, but for MIF,
It's guarantees po. For example, Your Honor, the MRT investment does not impair on our capital, Your Honor. And there are
I know, but for this particular investment, but my point is, if we will carry this type of suggestion throughout the bill, I just want to point this out, no, because and subject, of course, the committee's study, we're actually not reflecting the true nature of your investment, which I think it's a bad practice.
Your Honor,
We cannot treat this investment as risk-free. From what the discussion I heard earlier, there's certain amount of risk involved.
Your Honor, with all due respect, the risk is being taken by the MIC, but as far as the bank is concerned, the bank would like to be protected from that risk.
Yeah, I know your point. I get your point. No, I get your point. But again, no, this is a policy issue that the DOF took, and I would assume that they have consulted the two banks, the two major investors in this endeavor, and you put your money with your eyes wide open that there is risk involved. No?
Your Honor,
And my point there is we're also protecting the depositors of the bank. Because at the end of the I'm keeping this simple, because at the end of the day, those risks will be transferred to the investors.
Your Honor, the provision that we respectfully propose is only for the computation of our adequacy ratios. That this amount that we invest in the corporation not be included when the BSP computes our ratio, our capital adequacy ratios.
Will the investment of the land bank and the DBP be guaranteed by the MIF or national government? Is there such an arrangement?
Your Honor, Section 11 of the bill.
For example, everything in this type of activity, not everything is rosy. No? In some cases, we'll have downturns, and are the banks protected? Or is there a certain level of guarantee for the investors?
Your Honor, Section 11 of the proposed bill mentions that security or debt instruments issued by the MIC to the GIFs shall be guaranteed by the national government.
Okay. So who bears the risk? Who bears the risk?
The
In other
national
words, that's my
government.
point.
The
The
national
taxpayers. Correct?
Ultimately,
Ultimately, is the taxpayer, us, bears the risk. All of us will bear the risk. No, so that's the point. No? We have to be reflective of what we want to do. And this type of funds, and I saw the portfolio, no? Even though the portfolio are, I know this will be managed ultimately by experts, but it's not completely risk-free. For example, investing in infrastructure. It's long-term. The longer the infrastructure, the higher the risk. We have cases of MRT at one point. They could not pay. And it was very messy. So my point of the matter is I saw this percentage allocation of investable funds. These are not, even though we can mitigate the risk by hedging from one asset class to another, but it's not completely risk-free. You know? So my point there is we're transferring the risk to the taxpayers. Ultimately, all of us. And if deficiency will happen, we have to cough up, pump in additional capital to this fund. So that's another point that we have to look at. Who bears the risk at the end of the day? Treasurer, you wanna?
If I may, Senator, I just want also to mention that part of the legislation, a risk management unit will also be established, and the board will also come up with an investment strategy. And obviously, part of the investment strategies to ensure that there's a good performance of the investments of the fund. There are also penal sanctions against yung fraud and underperformance of those who are running the fund. So there are a lot of safeguards to ensure that the fund would be viable.
Thank you. Treasurer Leah. Mr. Chairman, I would yield to our other colleagues. I have a few more, but I'll yield so that others can participate.
Okay. Yes, at this point, we'd like to recognize Senator Ontiveros. Thank you.
Salamat Mr. Chair at magandang umaga po muli sa lahat. Okay, Mr. Chair, for my first question, salamat. I'd like to share what a former president of a bank shared with me recently. Sabi niya, the Philippines has a high level of debt to finance government programs and no new sources of funds have come into consideration since the MIF discussion started. And because instead of paying debt, we are putting up an SWF, in effect, the Philippines is borrowing the money for the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Sabi niya, we should perhaps call it the Sovereign Liability Fund, as it is effectively funded by liabilities. There is also no assurance that the cost of borrowing will be lower than the yield to be generated by the SWF. So, mali po ba itong two-part statement, Mr. Chair, na there are no new sources of funds that have come into consideration at now we will therefore be funding the Maharlika Investment Fund with even more debt and thus deviating from the administration's plan of bringing down the debt to GDP ratio from 63% to just a little over 50% by 2028. Si National Treasurer De Leon po ba ang pwedeng sumagot, Mr. Chair?
We'll try to answer po.
Salamat, ma'am.
Oo. Kanina po nabanggit nga po ni Senator Mark Villar about the difference between debt and equity. So, isa nga po sa, we're looking into this fund to be able to attract more equity because then investors will have nga po yung long-term placements do sa fund and at the same time, share in the risk of the fund. So, yun po ang nakikita natin. And again, I would cite po yung example na nangyari po sa other sovereign wealth funds na they were able to generate co-investments into the undertakings, particular infrastructure projects nung pong kanilang mga sovereign wealth funds na ito. So we see na given that there would now be more funding in the form of equity na papasok, then it can be able to complement some of our infrastructure investments. And ultimately, siguro po, mababawasan na po yung fiscal pressure on the part of the budget because some of these activities can later on be taken up by the fund itself, together with the investments from offshore and even from the domestic investors, like our mga infrastructure funds locally as well.
Pero at this point in time po, ma'am, wala pa po yung new sources na yon. I-attract pa lang po natin through co-investments.
Wala pa po tayong legislation. And so I think when we were discussing this, they were also very eager, but they want to see the concept. Ano po ba ang how to be able to invest in the fund? Because the scheme, the structure is not yet there. But of course, they're aware about the draft legislation. But there's enthusiasm on their part na to be able to see how this would evolve and how how later on the opening where they can also participate.
Yung pag tinayo po yung Maharlika Fund under the current terms as reflected in the bill, ano po yung magiging epekto nun dun sa ambisyon ng gobyerno na ibaba yung debt to GDP ratio natin? Ano po yung projection nyo doon?
I think right now wala pa po yung pang firm projection, but as we see na mas mapapababa po natin yung ating mga debt metrics if we have already the fund, because yun nga po, mababawasan po yung need for us to be able to borrow, because some of these can already be in the infrastructure projects, our mga development projects that we have can already be funded by these co-investments by the fund and other mga global investors who would be participating in the MIF.
Sabi nyo nga po mababawasan yung need natin to take out more debts, take on more loans. Pero sa ngayon, yun yung sitwasyon natin. Sa bisperas ng pagpapanganak ng Maharlika Fund, we are in a situation na we will need to take out more debts. Tama po ba yun?
Yes, because we are still, ma'am, alam po yung sa medium, but we have the medium term fiscal framework already. Now we will see that yung trajectory ng ating debt would already be coming down. Had it not been for the pandemic, naka 39.6% na po tayo ng debt to GDP nung 2019. And at the same time, kasi what's a more viable measure ngayon is really on the general government debt to GDP. Hindi lang po yung national government, because other parts of the government are also operating on a surplus. So yung mga korporasyon, mga local government, so if you look at that, mas mababa po yung pong general government debt to GDP than the NG debt to GDP.
And speaking po of the MTFF, kahit nung tinalakay namin yung medium-term fiscal framework dito, wala pa doon yung Maharlika Fund, di po ba? Hindi naman po siya nabanggit doon, hindi rin po nabanggit sa inaugural address, kahit sa unang SONA ni Presidente. Wala pa po siya sa Ambition 2040. Tama po ba? Yes, Mr. Chair, si Asek Bernabe daw po.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask to be recognized.
Please proceed,
po.
Aseng.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am po. Hindi po siya kasama doon sa medium-term fiscal program. But ang contemplation po namin, just to add po sa sinabi ni Treasurer on potentially lowering the debt metrics, we contemplate po in the crafting of the bill as this one as non-tax revenues. Meaning, if ever po it becomes successful, it would provide additional coffers, additional funds to the national government. And for example po, in one of the TWGs in Congress, and I'd like to address po yung additional concerns or question po ni Senator Gatchalian. In case lang po, this is all counterfactual, and in case and the MIF has the ability to invest in toll roads. For example, po, NLEX was, when they built on toll roads way back in 2005, it was about 54 billion. Of course, inflation going back. Assuming po, the MIF with the 75 billion invested its whole part of its money to be the one commercially involved in the toll road and management and collection of fees. By 2021 po, that NLEX revenues is around 5.9 billion. And assuming we are only the owner, and the NLEX paid taxes of around 900 million plus. It assumes, for example, 1 billion na lang po, rounded off. So together, if in the current structure of the bill, since exempted siya, the revenue, the government loses $1 billion, 1 billion pesos of taxes, but participates in the upside of 5.9 billion. We assume na, ma'am, na we participate in the co-ownership or joint venture in that establishment. So that would translate around 16 million pesos a day. A day po, that just dividing the 5.9 billion annual revenues 2021 divided by 365. That's around 16 million income of the MIF, which the MIF can translate to dividends to the national government. And yun po ang intention was to at least participate commercially in the potential upside of any commercial business, but at least developmental po. I mean, toll roads, railway systems, and roads, highways, and the like po.
Salamat, Asek Bernabe. So, backtrack lang ko ng konti. Before we get to that point, and dahil mukhang top of mind din po sa inyo yung INA bilang isa sa mga best practices model sa ating neighborhood, syempre, bago sila nakarating din sa ganong klaseng situation, let's just go back to the beginning. Meron nga po, gaya ng nabanggit ko kanina, meron na po silang handang portfolio ng mga already earning na mga proyekto, particularly sa petroleum, sa minerals, pang-attract talaga dun sa mga co-investors. Actually, Mr. Chair, itatanong ko sana ito sa huling tanong ko, but since napag-uusapan na rin, meron na po ba tayong ganyang portfolio of investment-ready, already earning projects? At kung wala pa, paano i-generate ito? Paano i-develop ng Maharlika Fund?
Mr. Chair. Senator, in the contemplation po in the crafting the bill, in the discussion po, we recognize that the national government is in deficit, but some of the GOCCs have so-called surplus, meaning investable funds like the Land Bank and DBP po. You're correct po na we have not having natural resources that in surplus, but in the plan of the Secretary of Finance, we plan to at least fully develop yung ating mining industries, extractive industries, which right now at least contribute less than 1% of GDP, and if at least could be at least robustly developed in such a way that it contributes to the coffers of the national government, that could be a source of potential upside na windfall that could contribute potentially to the fund.
Pero at this point in time nga po, wala pa po tayong ganyang portfolio tulad ng Indonesia nung simula nung kanilang
You're correct
ina,
po, ma'am.
pang-attract ng
You're correct po
co-investors.
from the
Opo.
minerals.
So ang pang-attract pa lang natin sa ngayon sa konsepto ng Maharlika ay yung comparatively mas maliit na initial funds. Opo. And since napag-usapan na rin yung NLEX kanina, bakit kailangan pang dumaan sa isang Maharlika Fund? Ang DBP ba? Ang Land Bank ba? Hindi ba pwedeng yung mga bangko diretsyong mag-invest sa isang NLEX? I mean, is that in the realm of the possible, DBP?
Your Honor, DBP is constrained in terms of the investments that it can make because of certain regulation. But with the existence of the fund, there's an opportunity for DBP to be involved in the investment of some instruments or even some in equity of projects that it might not be able to because of its mandate or because of its limitations.
Mr. Chair, I think our awaited Finance Secretary has arrived.
Yes, I'd like to acknowledge, well, first I'd like to acknowledge on the online presence of who? Of Senator Majority Floor Leader Joel Villanueva. I'd like to acknowledge his presence online. And of course, I'd like to recognize the presence of our Department of Finance Secretary, Secretary Ben Jokno. Thank you very much.
May I proceed, Mr. Chair?
Yes, you may proceed, yes, Senator.
Salamat po, Mr. Chair. At magandang umaga pong muli, Sec. Jokno.
Good morning. Good morning po, Your Honor.
And ma'am, sa ang land bank ba, posible ba na makapag-invest directly sa isang proyekto tulad ng NLEX na hindi na kailangan dumaan sa isang Maharlika Fund?
Of course.
Through the chair.
Yes, please proceed, ma'am.
Yes, Senator Ontiveros, sir. Short answer, Your Honor, is yes, we can. But for subject to regulatory provisions or review of our regulator, basically the BSP.
Salamat po, ma'am. And in the case of DBP, edi posible din na through proper means, tanggalin yung legal constraint. Ano exactly po yung legal constraint na iyon sa ngayon, sir?
Our mandate kasi po is with respect to particular sectors that we should be focused on. But yes, Your Honor, we can invest also in those things.
Salamat po. Without necessarily going through such a creature as a Maharlika Fund. Anyway, that was my first question, Mr. Chair. Moving on to my next. After his meeting in Davos, sinabi ni Presidente na the investment fund will not be like a bank that will accumulate funds, and after which the board of directors will decide on how the fund will be used. Instead, sabi ni Presidente, capital will be mobilized by the fund every time there is a viable investment that will require its support. Nasurpresa talaga akong marinig yung ganitong ideya kay Presidente, Mr. Chair. Kasi sa akin, simpleng ibig sabihin, we could altogether avoid creating a new entity na nag-authorize ng financial support sa mga strategic projects. Instead, the entity that will decide to provide the financial support for a project being considered, DBP man yan, Land Bank man yan, ibang entity pa ng gobyerno natin, ay pwedeng simpleng gamitin yung sariling existing rules niya of authorizing investments and expenditure. Kung yung entity naman nito ay yung, sabihin natin, NEDA board, pwede naman siya mag-authorize ng funding support, halimbawa para sa cold storage facilities, para sa sibuyas, para yung private sector din, mainganyo, no? To part with its own capital at mag-invest din sila sa cold storage facilities, halimbawa sa Nueva Ecija at saka sa Mindoro. Kami naman po sa Kongreso, pwede namang mag-proceed sa yung karaniwang proseso namin ng pag-authorize ng release of funds, kahit pa sa mga projects na multi-year cash release ang commitment. So pwede po ba, Mr. Chair, malaman yung pag-iisip ni Finance Secretary dito?
Yes, Your Honor. The purpose of the fund is to widen the options available to the government. So you're right, we can borrow money from the World Bank, we can borrow money from ADB, that will be appropriated in the General Appropriations Act. But the banks can also invest, but subject to some restrictions on, say, single borrower's limit, on the allowable investment for a particular sector, say housing, et cetera. So GSIS can do the same thing, SSS can do the same thing. But when you have a fund like this, and we're thinking of funding huge or large infrastructure projects. Okay, for example, if you want to build a subway, instead of borrowing money, for example, from Japan, which we will pay money, we can use this fund to invest in this particular undertaking. So you just widen the options available to the government, Your Honor.
Salamat, Sec, Mr. Chair. But again, pwede naman na lang natin i-widen yung options ng existing financial institutions natin.
Ang problema po, Your Honor, is that sometimes, for example, yung international airport ng Bicol, no, inabot po ng 10 years yung kasi pitsi lang po ang allocation. When you allocate money, say 200 million this year, 200 million that, masyado pong matagal bago matapos yung project. So nawawalan po ng yung present value ng project na dapat na derive mo na kagad within, say, if you can construct that within 3 years instead of 10 years, malaki pong difference ng benefit po nun.
Salamat, Sec, Mr. Chair. Kapag po ba Maharlika Fund, mas mabilis pong mapapatupad yung ganyang mga big ticket projects? Nabanggit nga rin po ulit yung subway kanina. Dun sa pagtatanong ni Sen Gatchalian, sinabi nga na malaki yung at least initial fund na maliit ang Maharlika Fund amount kumpara sa mga ongoing big ticket projects natin, tulad nga po ng subway ngayon. Mas mabilis po ba talaga kung Maharlika Fund ang gagawa nito?
So tingin ko po kung dedicated po yung Maharlika Fund for huge projects na gano'n, ay mas madali pong magagawa. Kasi For example, nag-allocate po halimbawa kami ng 1 billion for this project. Pagdating po sa Congress, kinakat po ng Congress, no? Nadidisrupt po yung mga right of way na dapat nabili na ng ano, kinakat ng Congress, hindi magagawa kagad yun. So yun po, it interface. Kahit multi-year project po, ito nagtatagal ho dahil nga there's a subject to, hindi nyo nakakoncentrate dun sa objective to have it constructed as soon as possible so you derive the benefit as soon as possible.
Can I just take
Yes, Mr. Chair.
recognize our Senate President Pro Tempore, Senator Lauren Legarda. Thank you. Please proceed.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. And I guess, Sec Jokno, kami na nagtatrabaho sa Kongreso, lalo na kaming hindi kumbinsido sa Maharlika Fund, we can hear this as a challenge, yung mas timely action sa pamamagitan ng GAA at iba pang legislative support sa parte po namin na gustong mas tignan yung alternative means of funding important government projects bukod dito sa Maharlika Fund. So, salamat po. Moving on po to my next question. Yung isang argumento po na ginagamit ng mga proponents ng measure na ito ay, yun na nga, na mag-i-induce ito ng co-financing ng infrastructure projects. So, with a view to clarifying further the role that the MIF financing is intended to play sa pag-induce pareho ng foreign at saka domestic funding para mag-co-finance nitong infrastructure projects, may I ask a resource person from Chair pala, nandito po ba ang NEDA PPP Center? Dito si SP.
If I can just
Yes, Mr.
acknowledge
Chair.
the presence of our Senate President, Miguel Subiri. Thank you. Please proceed.
Salamat, Mr. Chair. Maayong buntag sa SP. Chair, nandito po ba ang PPP Center ng NEDA o kaya ang DOE or iba pang infrastructure agencies? Mr. Chair? May DOE ba or NEDA PPP Center or other infra agencies na nandirito?
NEDA has a representative here, I believe. Yes.
Yeah, PPP Center is not here. Yeah.
Then, Chair,
Take down notes.
Napaka-overqualified mag-take down notes, Yusek Edilion. Sige po, just for the record, itatanong ko po sana sa PPP Center ninyo, i-describe yung present modes by which yung project ideas, halimbawa para sa renewable energy na binanggit din ni National Treasurer kanina, paano itong mga ideya sa RE ay brought through the project identification and approval pipeline at kung papaano ito ginagawang less risky via government promises to bear project risks or via government co-finance. And lastly, kung papaano napapackage itong mga proyekto, halimbawa nga RE projects, sa mga special purpose vehicles o SPVs para nga mag-attract pareho ng foreign at domestic equity at saka bank financing. And lastly, ma'am, para pa rin sa PPP Center ninyo, hilingin ko sana, siguro kahit i-submit na lang po nila in writing through the chair, i-describe po nila yung institutional innovations, if any, halimbawa via describing the limitation of those modes, yung unang binanggit ko po, citing specific projects na presently nasa pipeline pero dumadanas ng delays, at saka paano itong mga present project paano nito pine-present yung project identification, co-financing, at saka legal packaging modes. Paano ito ma-alter sa pag-introduce ng Maharlika funding modality. So anong present constraints ang maa-address ng Maharlika investment support na hindi kayang i-address ng present mechanisms. And lastly po, kung DBP nagpo-provide ng cash flow support para sa irrigation or potable water concession projects, nisip ko po kasi, as it already does now, simpleng pwede na lang gamitin ng DBP yung GAA fund releases at saka future cash flow mula sa operation ng water facilities bilang collateral. So salamat, Yusek Edilion. And Sir VP Mantaring, any thoughts about that? DBP at saka yung in relation sa irrigation and potable water projects.
We do have programs po on water.
So meron bang value added ang isang Maharlika fund sa kasalukuyang nagagawa nyo na providing support for irrigation and water projects?
The demand, I believe, is still a lot, and there's still a lot of development that can happen as far as that's concerned.
And can that development take place institutionally within DBP or essential ba ang isang Maharlika Fund para ma-expand nyo yung capacity nyo?
It can go both ways po, but with the Maharlika Fund, there will be more that can go around because we're also constrained by our lending capacity because of our capitalization.
Salamat po, VP Mantaring and Yusek Edilion. Going to my next question, do I still have time, Mr. Chair, in this round?
Please proceed.
Salamat, Chair.
Please.
So let me now, Mr. Chair, go straight to Article 11. Kasi ito yung isang article natin that really jumps out to me the most. Yung penal provision po, ridiculously napakababa. Considering na yung Maharlika Investment Fund mag-handle ng billions of pesos. Ni walang forfeiture ng ill-gotten wealth in favor of government. Walang perpetual disqualification from public office for offenses committed by government officials na bahagi ng MIC board. Likewise, walang provision sa event na yung funds invested ay gamitin sa money laundering. Halimbawa po, sa graft and corrupt practices, ang isang korporasyon na mag-appoint ng intermediary na mag-engage pala sa graft and corrupt practices, mafa-fine lang siya sa 100,000 to 1 million pesos. Isang director o officer na magto-tolerate ng ganyang graft and corrupt practices, mapipinalize ng 500,000 hanggang 1 million pesos. Kabaliktad niyan, sa Plunder Act, enacted in 1991, amended in 93, ito po tungkol sa pag-amass ng ill-gotten wealth sa aggregate amount ng 50 million pesos, punishable ng reclusion perpetua, 20 to 40 years. Forfeiture of ill-gotten wealth in favor of government and perpetual disqualification from public office. Bakit po napakababa ng proposed penalties dito sa napakalaking ipinapangarap na Maharlika Fund, Mr. Chair? Sino po ang pwedeng...
May I answer
Yes,
the
Mr.
question?
Chair.
That's why we have to go through this process. If you want to propose amendments to the House version, it's going to be up to you and legislators to impose a higher penalty if you feel that a higher penalty is called for.
Salamat, Sec. Jokno, Mr. Chair. Of course, we're looking at that considering the Senate bill, our Senate bill. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I think thank you for that very enlightening line of question. I think that's a good point. You know, we're trying to balance the penalties from the private sector and the public sector. Of course, at the same time, realizing that you know, this is sort of a hybrid. This is a hybrid format that we're working on. I'd have along the lines of questioning of are you
I just have a couple more questions after you, Mr. Chair.
okay. I just want quick. I was just curious about pursuing this line about regarding the limitations of the banks. I know that Senator Antiveros mentioned that earlier. I would like to request if you could maybe specifically give us some of the limitations that you have, so that the public can also be informed about what the advantages of the Maharlika. Because of course banks, like what Secretary, there's a single borrower's limit, and of course, you know, when it comes to your assets, yes, you can purchase asset, but of course, in the way that you manage it is also limited. And in the orientation, when banks buy it, it's with the orientation that you want to dispose of the asset, not manage it for the future, and then eventually IPO. That's not in the. So I hope maybe either the Land Bank or DBP can enlighten us on what the limitations are regarding your ownership acquisition of assets using your funds, and then afterwards you can proceed. I just want to be enlightened with that point.
Mr. Chair, for Land Bank, as a universal bank, we can actually invest in allied and non-allied undertakings. So, allied non-allied undertakings, of course, are undertakings that are not related to financial services. The example given a while ago by Senator Ontiveros are highways, I think, and other infra projects. We can do those. We can invest in those non-allied services, but uh, the risk weight or even our entire investment in both those investments, even allied investments, will be deducted from our capital. And I think that is where my colleague from the DBP was coming from. And that is why in the bill, there is a request for the investment of the banks in the MIC or MIF be exempted from the regulatory the regulation that will have to be deducted from our capital. But if I may add, Mr. Chair, all the investments of the bank, be it in equity or in via loans, are subject to the usual due diligence. And each bank, I can speak for Land Bank and also for DBP because I was once in DBP, we have actually a set of risk asset acceptance criteria, the first filter. So not but not to also ignore the national socio-economic agenda, because as policy banks, we are expected to support the national economic agenda. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I understand. Like most funds, they have a threshold where they must a large portion of their fund, and I don't know if you have the same criteria. A large portion of the fund has to be invested in virtually risk-free, which is basically government T-bills, risk-free instruments. In your case, how much of what is the composition of your asset? What are the requirements? Because I know there are they have very strict requirements. I think a majority, a large percentage has to be in government securities, so that it's virtually risk free. So I wonder what is the threshold for land bank and.
Actually, the threshold, it's not a very, it's a very dynamic process, Mr. Chairman. What we do have by way of, again, regulation is a single borrower's limit when we lend. So, which is based on our capital. So for land bank, that is actually huge, almost more than 60 billion per single borrower. In terms of investment, we have an asset and liability committee that will make sure that our investments, given the risk weights of the different asset classes, will have to be within our desired capital adequacy ratio. Right now, 97% of our 1.3 trillion in investments, net of the loans, are in government securities. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Senator Ontiveros.
Salamat, Chair. Actually, isang tanong na lang po at saka isang motion. So, to pursue some of the points raised earlier by Sen. Escudero, so Section 19 provides for the composition of the 15-member board. Tapos yung independent directors shall be chosen by the advisory body. So, syempre, the board should always ensure na meron siyang appropriate... Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I see Sec. Pangandaman.
Sorry, yes. I'd like to acknowledge, take a minute to acknowledge our DBM Secretary, Secretary Amena Pangandaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was saying na yung board, no, kailangan siguruhin niya na may appropriate mix of competence and expertise siya. So, who could please clarify sino po itong 6 regular members representing contributors to the fund? Kasi kasi ngayon na nga po, per Section 11, the fund's initial capitalization shall be sourced from Land Bank and DBP with subsequent annual contributions from Bangko Sentral, PAGCOR, and other gaming corporations. So, given this, sino pa po yung magbubuo ng 6 na regular members ng board ng MIC? Sino pa yung remaining 4?
The independent directors, Your Honor, will be chosen by the Board of Advisors. No? And I think eventually they should be appointed by the President. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Secretary. Pero iba pa po yung 5 independent directors. Yung po munang 6 regular members. Kasi sa ngayon, nakapangalan pa lang Land Bank, DBP. Sino pa po yung 4?
Depende po yun sa contribution ng organization or ng financial institution doon sa capital ng fund. Yes.
Salamat, Secretary. And, opo,
Mr. Chair,
yes, indeed.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Chair, Attorney Mortel.
Mr. Chair, if I may be recognized.
Please proceed.
Along that question, Your Honors, Section 30 of the proposed bill provided that the regular directors will not be exempted to the coverage of the GCG. And therefore, by virtue of that, they will be subjected also to the fit and proper rule under Section 15 of RA 10149. And therefore, it addresses the question that they will pass the scrutiny of GCG as far as their integrity, competence, and other requisites of the GCG for them to qualify to become a regular director.
Salamat po, Commissioner Mortel. Of course, standing pa rin yung mga concerns na initially ni-raise ni Sen. Escudero. Sino-sino ba ang mga ito? At talagang magiging proportional ba yung representation nila sa board sa magnitude ng contribution nila dun sa Maharlika Fund? And further, ano po ba yung significance ng pagkakaroon ng 15-member board? Kailangan ba talaga ng board ng 15 members para sapat at efficiently magawa yung functions niya? Again, turning to the INA na isang best practices model apparently sa ating region, sila nga 5 individuals lang ang board nila as of 2021. At saka notably, walang miyembro ng board ng INA ay galing sa public sector. Ni concurrently nagsaserve sa executive position sa isang GFI nila or isang GOCC. Samantala yung 5-member advisory board nila ng INA, may 2 government reps, tapos 3 independent members from the private sector. So kailangan po ba talaga triple ang bilang ng board?
Your Honor, the original executive department's proposal was 7. So yung House po ang nagdagdag 15. So again, that is subject to your discussion. Kayo po magdidesisyon kung 7, 15, 13, kayo po magdidesisyon yan.
Well noted, Sec. Salamat po para doon. Importante din sa amin malaman yung history ng evolution ng bill concept nung fund na ito. So, dun po sa it was a very helpful material provided as chair that night of the briefing ng executive. Yung isang material na binigay nila sa atin, yung 2023 study ng Milken Institute, Best Practices of Sovereign Wealth Funds, the Case for the Philippines. Doon po hinighlight na research shows that political influence in board activities and management can worsen financial performance. So, considering this po, paano yung independence ng board masisiguro para maiwasan ng korupsyon, maiwasan ng politically driven investments kung yung chair, nothing personal, this is institutional, yung chair ay yung ating Secretary of Finance, isang cabinet secretary na kumikilos bilang alter ego ng presidente, at kung yung Bangko Sentral ay regular member din. Notable kasi at least dito sa Pilipinas, ang ating Bangko Sentral Governor ay chair ng Anti-Money Laundering Council. At yung AMLAC Secretariat composed ng full-time permanent employees ng Bangko Sentral. So, paano po nako-contemplate ngayon pa lang yung pagsiguro ng independence ng board given these circumstances, Mr. Chair?
I think ang independence po dyan on board is that they will serve fixed tenure. Hindi po pwedeng tanggalin basta-basta. No? And they will not be subject to confirmation by the Commission on Appointment. Number 3, yung budget po nila hindi po dadaan sa Kongreso. Okay.
Salamat po, Mr. Chair, Sec. Jokno. Huling tanong na lang bago yung aking brief motion, Mr. Chair. So considering na intention po natin dito sa Pilipinas makuha yung best practices ng sovereign wealth funds sa ibang mga jurisdictions, lalo na siguro una-una na sa loob nitong ating ASEAN region. Pwede po bang mag-request ng kopya ng charters nung INA ng Indonesia, yung Temasek Holdings at pati yung GIC Private Limited ng Singapore, at pati yung Khazanah Nasional Berhad Board ng Malaysia. And lastly po, Mr. Chair, baka hingi rin po sana ng kopya nung charter ng insolvent na ngayon ng Malaysia na 1MDB, para lang maiwasan na if ever yung Maharlika ay gamitin bihang behikulo para gawin ang plunder at saka money laundering.
We'll provide those documents, Your Honor.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair, Sec. Jokno. So lastly, Mr. Chair, maikling motion na lamang po. Mr. Chair, I think this hearing benefits from hearing all voices around the table. Kaya respectfully, nagmo-motion po ako sa komite sa pamamagitan ng chair na mag-imbita ng mga representante sa Foundation for Economic Freedom, Management Association of the Philippines, at saka UP Alumni Association na maging resource persons din po sa ating komite. In a joint private letter sa opisina ko, pinirmahan po na Mr. Calixto Chiquiamco, Attorney Benedicta D. Baladad at Ms. Mia Angela Alentahan. Sinuma po nila yung kanilang posisyon at nag-express po sila ng interes na ipaliwanag ito dito sa ating Senate hearings. And just lastly, to summarize their position, sabi po nila sa sulat, the MIF is highly questionable as a strategy to achieve the government's stated objectives. This is due to the fundamental flaw that funding of the MIF will not come from significant surpluses from commodity earnings or government operating results. Instead, the funding will be extracted from and weaken the BSP, GFIs, and other GOCCs. Weakening the BSP will reduce its ability to fulfill its primary purposes, and relying on the BSP's dividends will engender systemic risks. Giving the GFIs a statutory guarantee for their lendings to the MIF will open the sizable liquidity of the LBP and the DBP, but it creates no incentive for diligence since the risk is passed as a contingent liability entirely to the NG. At sa ganitong dahilan, Mr. Chair, respectfully move that the committee invite those 3 additional resource persons. I so move, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Senator. And I hereby direct the Secretariat to please invite those resource persons mentioned by Senator Ontiveros. And rest assured, we will be inviting the stakeholders present so that we can really hear all the possible opinions so that what comes out of the committee will be a very refined report.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair, at sa ating government economic managers.
Thank you very much. And Sen. Lauren, would you like to ask him? At this point, I'd like to recognize online Majority Floor Leader Joel Villanueva. Session suspended. recognize Senate President Pro Tem Lauren Legarda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because of the voluminous materials and the briefing the other day, I'm still reading what transpired in the briefing and rereading all the documents here. We also have the CA. I will not ask questions in this hearing, but exercise the option of introducing amendments. And if there is a second hearing, and I'm sure there is, I may ask questions, but for the purpose of this first hearing, I will no longer ask questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Legarda. And we
Maybe in the next hearing, I'm sure it was not yet asked, they can address the difficulties of, was it the Swedish or the Finnish sovereign fund?
Norway, I believe. Was it
Norway. The Norway sovereign wealth fund that collapsed, that had billions of losses. Was that question already asked?
Not yet, Senator.
It was not yet asked. They may not be ready because it just happened yesterday. They may not be ready to answer it. I want to be enlightened. The difference between the Norway wealth fund and the cost of the collapse and the effect on a first world economy compared to a developing nation aspiring to be upper middle income, according to the president in the Vandenor last night, and introducing a wealth fund. So maybe just a matrix of both. So I said I won't ask questions, but instead I have a request from the agencies present so that I understand. So
Yes.
the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, the source of funds, how it was created, how it is managed, the composition of the board, and why it lost a humongous amount, and the reasons, so that we learn from such a country and how we can improve this. Yeah.
Yes, so the committee hereby
Thanks.
directs, perhaps the NEDA would be the best agency to give us some information regarding the recent happenings regarding the Norwegian fund, and perhaps also they can. I asked earlier about the performance of these funds, so we can see, because of course these funds, the market fluctuates, so we have to look at it in a 5 to 10 year time period. So I hope that when we analyze, we look at the 5 year, maybe a 5-10 year horizon, so that we can see the average, the CAGR, the cumulative average growth rate of the value of these funds. So yes, I hope we can accommodate Senator, and the Secretariat's instructed to please inform the NEDA and request this for the next hearing, wherein we will invite some more resource persons. So
Yeah, we will
Since
comply.
Senator Villanueva is also not here, again, not a question, this is a request. I would like to know again in their submission that I will study and I will base my questions on this. The Securities Exchange Commission many years ago had already issued a memo on mandating corporations, the private sector, for their repertorial on ESG. So I would know, is ESG incorporated in the Maharlika Fund? And where in its provisions is ESG taken into consideration? And third request, and third request would be resilience. I don't speak of resilience insofar as disaster risk reduction alone, but even resilience in the broader aspect with regards to economic models and financial statistics. So I would like to see in which provisions of the proposed measure is resilience reflected. Number 4, I have a proposed bill which NEDA and our economic team, I believe, fully support. And I would like to pass this to be passed in this Congress, I hope, because the economic team agrees. And this is the PENCAS bill. And this is a 10-year-old United Nations, policy that the NEDA has been implementing, right? This is the measurement of our natural resource accounting. So I would like to see, since we're crafting a law for the future generations of our country, might as well put in all the concepts that are not in existing laws. So how is natural resource accounting mainstreamed in the Maharlika investment bill? So I will not ask questions. Instead, I had given assignments, requests for my further education and enlightenment. I will summarize. Natural resource accounting, this is not alien to you. NEDA knows what I mean. I have a pending measure. Number two, the Norway Wealth Fund, which collapsed. I'm sure you know that. It's in the news for the past 48 hours. So a matrix so that we are educated and we don't fall into same pitfalls. Third, resilience. And then after I've read all of those materials, I will exercise my option to be enlightened, educated, and ask questions if need be and propose amendments to the measure. Thank you. I truly appreciate the economic team and the financial managers and technical experts who continue to help us not only with our annual budget, but in keeping our economy afloat and robust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think your homework is, I hope you took down your homework. And I hope you can please, we can satisfy Senator Lauren with, I'm sure you will give very, very robust answers to her queries. I guess at this
We will submit, Mr. Chair.
we're just Senator Joel expressed an intention to ask questions. We're just confirming if he's on his way. So if you just indulge us for a few minutes.
Since Senator Villanueva is not here, kumpletuhin ko na lang. The most successful, I can see the smile of Mina. She knows me so well, Sec Mina. Last na, then tatayo na ako para wala na akong maisip pang, kasi nag-e-evolve eh. The most successful sovereign wealth fund in the world that was the model for our bill. Can you kindly give it to us? Of course, those who crafted it and drafted it, that originated from the House, must have used a model. So what is that most successful sovereign wealth fund that we patterned our bill after, and perhaps we compare the economies of both countries, our Philippine economy and the economy and that country of that sovereign wealth fund that we patterned after. Thank you. Tama na po yung 4 o 5 ba yun na request ko. Anyway, this is all for education, for enlightenment, and to help you pass the measure. Okay, thank you.
Senator Andrada, please.
Okay, at this point, I think at this point we'd like to recognize Senator Angara, who's online. He would like to ask some questions. So, Senator Angara, you are recognized. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to all our guests and our colleagues. And I'm having problems with my video, my computer. I cannot see the people, but I can hear it. So, can you hear me clearly, Mr. Chairman, just to check?
Yes, we can hear and see you loud and clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just at the outset, I think we're not experts here in on sovereign wealth funds. It's a new topic, a new territory for us. So we're learning along the way as well. But let me state at the outset that I support the goals of the sovereign wealth fund and our economic managers and the president in, as mentioned, first to expand the fiscal space available, and secondly to have more focused and strategic spending. Third is a better utilization also of idle and existing government assets which may be under or unutilized. So that's the premises of my increase. I think we need to fine tune the measure to a certain extent, as do all legislative measures, and to clarify perhaps the various exemptions, privileges, powers, and functions given to the sovereign wealth fund and its officials. So my initial increase, I'm thankful to our economic managers for having presented to us the other night, and I'll proceed from some of my my queries that night. Because often pointed out by some of the observers or economists is that economic or sovereign wealth funds are usually put up by countries which have surpluses or are commodity rich. And um, may I ask which are the countries which fall in maybe in our typology or in our category as being neither commodity rich but neither are in a budget surplus but want to put up a sovereign wealth fund. So sino po yung just like other countries we're trying to be middle income or higher uh, lower income, tama ba yun? I'm not sure. But my question is, saan tayo? Who would fall in those categories? Who are we modeling ourselves after in terms of creating this sovereign wealth fund, Mr. Chair?
Senator Angara, this is Leah.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, Treasurer Leah. Yeah,
Apo.
go ahead.
Yung pong like
We touched on this. We touched on this the other night,
Yes,
but
opo.
we weren't really able to
Yes.
explore it in detail. Oh.
Tama po. So, right now po, what we can cite nga po, the example that we've been using, yung pong INA, yung Indonesia Investment Authority.
Right.
So, we know, Indonesia, they're operating on both deficits, no? So, meron po silang current account deficit and at the same time, yung pong budget deficit. But still, they were able to nag-establish po sila ng sovereign wealth fund and at the same time ang in-infuse po in terms of cash resources, nag-infuse po ang government around $2 billion and then yung pong the rest na to top it to 5 billion ay yung mga shares ng in their government owned and controlled corporations. So yung pong naging seed funding for INA.
Right. How about in terms of, di ba may ano rin, Indonesia is mineral rich and I think they have oil also, no? How about
Yes.
those? Did they also use those?
I think
Or are those the basis for the government corporations who contribute to the
yes,
fund that
opo.
you mentioned?
Some of their corporations which are operating based on their natural resources, in particular yung kanilang pong oil reserves, yun po yung kinontribute nila sa INA.
So of the 5 billion, how much would you attribute the 5 billion you mentioned that's contributed by government corporations? Magkano doon ang resource based, would you say?
I would say siguro sir mga $2 billion of the 5.
The 5. And how would you categorize or saan nanggaling naman yung 3 billion, the remaining 3 billion?
Yung pong 2 billion, yung pong national government from their budget. The other 1 billion, I'm not really sure kung which particular natural resource it came from, but maybe we can get back to you na po.
Sure. No problem. We just want to really kind of bone up on the research on this since it's a new topic. So no problem with that, Treasurer. Please come back to us. And aside from Indonesia, who again,
another
yeah.
Another example po na based on what we were able to the information we got, yung pong India, they have the National Investment in Infrastructure Fund. So it's a development fund. Yung pong source of capital is budget appropriation. Ang initial po 3 billion and they have assets under management of about 4.3 billion dollars. Nung finan po yun ng 2015, they were operating again also on a fiscal deficit about 7.2%. And they also had then a current account deficit of 1.1% of GDP.
Okay. What is the value of the Indian fund now? Well, again, if you don't have it on hand, can you just furnish us
It's about ang assets under management is about 4.3 billion right now.
Okay. And how much was the contribution or the initial contribution or equity by the government? 3 billion.
3 billion po.
Okay. And how old are these funds, the Indonesian and the Indian funds?
Yung pong si Indonesia, they had yung pong the law passed in 2019, I understand, but they only started operating in 2021.
Okay. So it's very new actually. We're using a new fund to kind of be our inspiration or example. How about the Indian fund?
2015.
2015. So what's the average return of the Indian fund in the years since?
The information on that, can we revert to you na lang,
Yeah,
Senator?
certainly. You can, Mr. Chair, just maybe if the Secretariat could help take note of the.
Yes, actually, there were we requested those for the funds for the next, so we can they committed to the NEDA will help get the information for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Treasurer Leah, any other funds to your knowledge?
Another one, last one na to, sir, ha?
Apo.
More time. Vietnam po.
Vietnam, okay.
2005, ang source rin po is budget appropriation. Initial capitalization was $315 million. Now it has grown to 2.4 billion ng asset under management. And when they established the fund in 2005, ang fiscal deficit po ni Vietnam was 0.95% of GDP. They were also operating on a current account deficit. It's about 0.77% of GDP.
Okay.
Ang debt po nila, sir, can I just mention, ang debt nila at that time was 28.7% of GDP. In the case of India, in 2015, it was 69.1% of GDP.
Right. What is Vietnam? How's Vietnam doing now? Because they've gotten a lot of foreign investment since then. So I suppose their budget situation has changed substantially.
Yes, sir. But yung pong ano lang, the point na even when they were operating on the twin deficits, they managed to establish the fund.
Got it. Right. Okay, that's a good point. So who are the most successful sovereign wealth funds? We're aware, again, I'd like to be educated. I'm aware of the GIC and Temasek of Singapore. Then we have the Norwegian fund, which was mentioned by Pro Temp Legarda, but which was also in the news for having lost over $100 billion. No, so you have any information on that, on the Norwegian fund?
Sir, yes, we will. I think that was an assignment from Senator Ligard that we will get back to in terms
But do you
of
have
the
anything at the
losses.
moment?
Ito po, Norges.
Norges, okay.
Okay. It's a stabilization fund. The source of funding was of course from the excess commodity revenues nila. The initial capitalization and it in 1990 when it was established was around $200 million. The assets under management right now is 1.4 trillion dollars.
Right. So the losses were approximately 10% to 15% of their assets under management.
But only for the year because of the market conditions.
Right. And are these paper losses or actual losses? As in, they liquidated their holdings already.
No, baka sir, ano lang, paper lang.
Paper losses, okay.
Unrealized.
Right. And do you know why they lost that money? What were the investments? Was it
Because of the interest rate regime right now, siguro sir at that time medyo mababa yung ano nila, then tumaas ang interest rate spike. So in terms of the performance of the bond or of the debt instruments, the securities that they not currently holding, medyo nag-turn negative.
Okay. Okay. Yun na lang. I'll just join my colleagues in asking for more information on the funds and perhaps where can we be categorized there and what were the success stories and the best practices of some of these funds when they were being established, and these are some of those which we may seek to emulate because we're not similarly situated as like the Middle Eastern countries who have some of the biggest sovereign wealth funds, no? Mr. Chair, I'm concerned about the accountabilities because earlier Secretary Diokno mentioned how the funds will not be politicized and the safeguards and mechanisms for that. But I'd like to go to the other side of the coin as to the accountabilities. How can we ensure accountability to prevent or to punish or penalize wasteful or inefficient spending? Yun ang tanong ko po, Mr. Chair.
Your Honor, meron pong cap na 2% sa administrative expense. 2% of the fund. Okay, so you cannot go beyond that. Okay, so you cannot misuse the fund unnecessarily. Okay.
But what about how about for wrong decisions, in instance, waste or decisions which resulted in losses? What is the recourse in those cases?
Yung losses po, mahirap pong bigyan ng, kasi depende rin po ang performance ng fund sa economic cycle eh. Of course, the economy fluctuates, no? So yun nga, yung sinabi nyo kanina, pwedeng paper loss lang yun for the term of a particular administration, but it could also recover. So hindi po pwedeng, and we observe that in our investment, even sa central bank, no? Right now, talagang negative yung performance ng mga funds na nag-invest na namin. But that's because of the cycle, economic cycle. But during good times, maganda rin naman ang performance. So mahirap pong sabihin na during bad times, ipoprosecute po natin. Hirap naman siguro nun. But I don't know what kind of safeguard you will. I think what we can do is just choose the best and the brightest who will manage the fund, no? And trust that they will do the right thing. No?
Mr. Chair, may I be recognized?
You recognize. And I'd just like to point out also, I think, for in terms of investment strategies and risk management, as we all know, there's fluctuations along, but the general, when we look at a curve, it should be over a long period of time. And when I say long period, 5 to 10 period, then that's how you look at the investment performance. Of course, there might be times when there are dips, but in general, there's an upward bias. Similar to the PSE, there's you average out the returns. In general, you say in general, it goes up, it outperforms, it can outperform, the treasury bills, right? In general. So, I mean, just for the information of the public, perhaps when it comes to investment strategies, it's over an extended period of time. So anyway, sir, yes, we recognize.
Yes, in support of the safeguards being raised by Secretary Jokno.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I don't know who's speaking because I cannot see the person. Could they identify?
I'm sorry, Your Honor. This is Attorney Mortel, the Commissioner of GCG.
Thank you.
In support of the statement of Secretary Jokno, one of the safeguards that is embedded in the proposed bill is the Section 19 of RA 10149. That refers to the fiduciary duties of the members of the board, wherein their action shall be guided by the principles embodied therein. So if I mention some, in Section 19, the members of the board and officers of GOCC shall act with utmost and undivided loyalty to the GOCC, act with due care, extraordinary diligence, skill, and good faith in the conduct of the business of the GOCC, avoid conflict of interest, and declare any interest they may have in any particular matter before the board, apply sound business principles to ensure the financial soundness of the GOCC. And along that principle, Your Honors, they are also covered with Section 25 and Section 26 of RA 10149, referring to the full disclosure and the power to conduct audit as far as the transaction of MIC is concerned, Your Honors.
Thank you, Attorney Mortel. But are these not similar to the general fiduciary duties held by directors of a bank, for example, or a corporation, or an investment company? How are they different from the duties or the fiduciary duties held by these? Are they of a stricter nature?
No, Your Honors, as far as RA 10149 is concerned, all the GOCCs under our coverage are covered similarly, Your Honors.
Okay. So, hindi ba dapat mas matindi yung safeguards dito sa MIC or MIF? Precisely because you're handling huge amounts of public money, which is not the case with some of our more, no disrespect to them, more minor GOCCs.
That part, Your Honor, we will defer to the wisdom of the legislators, Your
Oh,
Honors.
may maisip ba kayo, since you're already on deck, may maisip ba kayong accountability dyan? Would it not be better, for example, because the secretaries who sit on the board, for example, are bound under the Constitution not to have any other office or employment. Yung binanggit ninyong anti-conflict of interest, ano lang po, parang they should disclose any conflict of interest. Pero yung sa cabinet secretaries, they cannot have any other office or employment. That's the wording of the Constitution. So talagang walang. It ensures that walang conflict of interest. Would it not be better if all the directors did not have any other office or employment except to be full-time here? I'm not saying that's what I want, but since we went down that road, hindi ba ganon mas matibay yung ganong klaseng panukala?
We submit to the wisdom of the
I'm
legislators,
asking
Your
your
Honors.
opinion because you're preferring your opinion, so I'm asking for your opinion.
Your Honor, as far as this representation is concerned, it is to the best interest of the government to always protect its state's ownership, Your Honor. And along that principle, we do agree that we have to put up a stricter measures, Your Honors.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for the recommendations of the GCG and the OGCC as to safeguards for accountabilities, Your Honor. Because, when under the Constitution, when public monies are paid out of the national treasury, it is pursuant to an appropriation based on law. So there is a built-in accountability, and representatives are elected by the people. So how do other countries do it? How do they make sure that, aside from what Secretary Jokto said, and I agree with him, that we appoint the best possible individuals with the best possible reputation. So you have their reputational collateral as an additional safeguard. Pero ano po yung in addition to that? Because yung binanggit po na fiduciary duties, that's present in a lot of corporations, and yet we see a lot of corporate misdeeds despite all of these duties. So yun ang point ko, Mr. Chair. Can anyone address this in addition to what's been said already?
Maybe, Your Honor, you can require for the independent directors that they divest of any interest.
Okay,
If
that's a
you're an
possibility.
independent director, that's a possibility, Your Honor.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
There was something in the media which came out regarding the utilization of idle or existing government assets which are not being or which are underutilized or not being utilized, Mr. Chair. May I ask what is the plan with respect to that aspect or that topic?
Your Honor, some of the assets of the government, we privatize them and we use them for the budget. Okay, but some assets are not listed among those which we use for the budget. For example, yung Mylong, yung sa Makati, and Ben.
Mylong. Oh.
Yeah, pwede po natin gawing source yun of this fund. For example, we can sell it altogether. Meron mga power plants or power like yung Kaliraya, we can sell that and we can use it as part of the so it's also if you remember kung sana po kung had we used this before yung sa Malampaya proceeds, that's around 20 billion eh. Nasayang lang po yun kung saan napunta po yun. Sana nagamit natin yun as part of the wealth fund. Hindi ho ba? Yung mga ganon. And we are, of course, we are opening up the mining sector after closing it for more than a decade. I think the proceeds of that, the royalty from the mining sector, part of that can also be used as part of this Malampaya. Those are the various sources, Your Honor.
Yes, can we ask for a list of all these assets that are being considered to be either sold or...
Yes, sir. We will provide the list of these assets.
Thank you. Are for instance, the real estate owned by the government abroad, for instance, is that part of the pie that's being considered, Your Honor?
Well, at the moment, we're not contemplating on using them, Your Honor.
Yeah, no, because I understand, don't we have real estate in New York? That's very valuable. Are we using all of that real estate, for instance?
We have a building on the Avenue, and there's another residence somewhere in New York. And in Japan, we have 4 properties. So we might consider them, but I don't know whether we are going to sell them at this time, right? Maybe we can
Sen, if I can just interject, Sen, that's an interesting idea where you sell idle assets and put them into investments that give recurring income, rather than selling them and just using them for
that's
government
another
spending.
option.
That's a very
We have on Annex 2 a summary of government assets for disposal.
Yeah, maybe be furnished with that, Secretary, please. So I think that's all for now, Mr. Chair. Again, we reiterate our support for the fund, but the need to really fine tune a lot of the provisions in the coming meetings, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may just
yes. USEC.
Rosie De Leon.
Yes, please introduce para for the benefit of Senator Ang.
Yeah, this hi Senator Angara. This is
Hi,
Rose
Yusek.
Marie De Leon, Yusek from NEDA.
Yes,
Just
yes,
to add to the conversation on the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund. Actually, the chair is right that we have to look at it over a longer time period. Kasi if we looked at the past 10 years, there were 2 times that this fund actually had a negative return. So nagkaroon ng losses. And the first one was in the global financial crisis. And then yung very latest one was yun nga yung last year, no? But over that period of 10 years, 12% yung kanyang average return, even counting the losses.
Very good, very good. That's a
yeah.
good. That's a good. I think that's the way. That's the correct. The chairman is
Mhm.
correct. That's the need. That's the way to view these
Yeah.
funds because in business in the equity markets, it's really an up and down.
Yes.
So you cannot
Yes.
use a bad year as the gauge.
Yeah. And yung losses nila last year, it was really a combination of the war in Europe, the high inflation rate, and the high interest rates. So that really resulted in the losses.
Right.
Yeah,
but
but we're
I think it's still necessary to look at what they invested in. Like I
Yes,
understand
for
the
sure.
Singaporean Wealth Fund lost money in Bitcoin. So
As
we
well.
really have to look at the riskier investments and perhaps maybe
Mm.
place a cap on those riskier investments going forward.
Yes, yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are you? Is that your final question, Senator?
I'm done. I'm done for now, Mr. Chair. I just like I'll ask on the second round if after hearing more resource persons. Thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Angara. And of course, I'd like to recognize at this point,
Physically present.
physically present. He wanted us to emphasize the physical part of that, physically present. Senator Joel Villanueva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, because I couldn't get my chance to speak a while ago. I was online, and for the record, I was the first one on the list, Mr. Chairman. Just to put that on record. Talagang ako na. That's why I went here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon po, to our dear secretaries. I just have a couple of questions. I've been listening attentively to the discussions a while ago. In fact, it's very important to note what Senator Sherwin made the emphasis a while ago about the ultimate risk taker here. Walang iba kundi yung taxpayers, no? And it's also good to point out that investments have risks. May mga risks talaga yan, and mahirap magkaroon ng false hopes that everything will be okay because we have seen what happened to a lot of countries, and that's why probably I'll ask later yung mga sovereign wealth fund. For example, Mr. Chairman, I was looking at the various sovereign wealth fund self-assessments that have been published by the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. Some of the cited case studies include yung Korea Investment Corporation. They engage in proactive communication with stakeholders, reporting monthly to sponsors, issuing annual reports, making information publicly available on their website, participating in National Assembly audits. The KIC guarantees its independence by stipulating that other entities are prohibited from directly influencing or interfering with this entity. Yung sa Kazakhstan naman po, yung Samrok Kazina, founded in 2008, shared that one of the key principles of interaction is that public authorities cannot interfere in its operational activities or those of its portfolio companies, except for in cases provided by the laws of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Some of the operational activities that are the sole responsibility of the superior body of this sovereign wealth fund include the approval of its development strategy, appointment and early termination of chief executive of the fund, and approval of corporate governance code, among others. Now, I'm just laying the predicate, Mr. Chairman, and that's why I wanted to ask best practices of sovereign wealth funds. Ano yung gusto nating modelong gamitin? Higit sa lahat, itaas natin yung antas ng transparency and accountability sa ating i-create na wealth fund. I would like to put on record, Mr. Chairman, that I wanted to be more active here in the committee so that by the time we sponsor it on the floor, this representation can help out and not just facilitate smoothly the deliberation of this measure, but also to make sure that this representation understand clearly the objectives of this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please, if there's any, maybe from DOF, BSP, or NEDA to answer this question.
Senator, ano po?
Yes, please,
Salamat po.
Ma'am De Leon,
Senator Joel.
National Treasury.
Opo. In between po, when we had the legislation, we've been consulting rin po yung mga multilaterals and also yung like, for instance, rin po sa Milken Institute. And in fact, we also have resource persons na they coming from Temasek, from INA. Now we've had seminars and discussions. So, and even these are really the practitioners also of those institutions. We also have resource persons locally who have also been very generous in their time to provide information on how these sovereign wealth funds are also being run. So, isa pong one thing that they have also mentioned to us in terms of the best practice, yun pong mga earnings before nung sovereign wealth funds na na-accumulate during the previous administrations ng mga fund na yon, hindi po matatouch. Yung po magagamit lang po nila would be yung what they have earned. So, and if ever that they would want to use yung some of the resources na earlier na accumulate, they would have to go and request for the approval of the Secretary of Finance. So, meron po mga ganong mga best practices and measures to ensure, to insulate po yung resources that have been accumulated para it would really be put to good use.
Thank you for that. No? It is important to establish accountability. A while ago when Senator Gatchalian was asking questions, I'm not sure if it's Land Bank or DBP saying parang, because it's guaranteed anyways by the national government, whatever happens. So parang wala kaming masyadong risk. And it turned out, tama, wala nga sila masyadong risk because the risk is being transferred to the taxpayers. No? And you made mention about Temasek. Temasek wrote off 275 million US dollars investments in FTX, a crypto exchange, on November 30, 2022. It was reported that the Singapore government has launched an investigation about this regarding this matter, the extent of due diligence that they have done before the investment was made at FTX. Yung recent report naman po ng international media, January 31 ito, Mr. Chairman, very recent, mainit-init pang balita, yung Norway Government Pension Fund Global lost a record of $164 billion, citing that the market was impacted by war in Europe, high inflation, and rising interest rates. So again, just to put on record, Mr. Chairman, this is not a simple law that we can just go away with mechanisms in order to protect the interest of our people, especially our taxpayers. And that's why kanina I was listening attentively, Mr. Chairman, kasi yung sufficiency of penalties, siguro importante talaga na maipakita rin itong ipinapanukala natin on how we can further strengthen, kala ko may party line, to deter yung mismanagement, no, and mishandling of funds. Kasi tinitignan ko po yung penalties dito enumerated in this bill as presently worded. Imposition of fines lang po no, given to directors, officers, other personnel will be yung managing ng pondo, itong mga hard-earned pondo. And kanina parang it was mentioned that for example, yung government worker, yung those who are in the government sector will be perpetually disqualified from holding public office, no. Isa pa, Mr. Chairman, yung permanent member, tinitignan ko po, yung permanent member ng board, yung pong Land Bank of the Philippines and DBP, no. But there is a mechanism under the bill to exit after 5 years. So what if yung Land Bank at DBP ay mag-exit? Will they still be members of the board? Kasi if we put this, Mr. Chairman, under the law, then we need to amend the law again to take this into consideration. I hope it's clear, Mr. Chairman. So I wanted to ask that question, Mr. Chairman.
Let me answer that.
Please,
Your Honor.
Secretary.
Siguro balanseado dapat yung bill. Mahirap naman na dalagyan mo ng utakot na restriction, no? Kasi ang idea talaga nito is that there is a risk management unit. Doon nakadepende yung decision ng board, no? Yung risk management unit, siya magre-recommend ng mix of investment. So halimbawa, meron kang 100%, no? Siguro, you can set aside 5% for risky asset at higher return, 25% for this kind of asset. So depende yun, no? I think it's difficult at this point na tayo ilalagay natin na ganun. Kasi, so we have to respect the decision ng ganun. Kasi otherwise, baka...
Yes, I understand that. Because after the bill becomes a law, lahat po ng pinag-usapan natin dito will be part of the law, no? So, ganda po na tulad yan, binanggit nyo po yan. Yes, we don't need to put everything. Kaya nga ho.
Siguro meron silang ganun part na pwede sa risky asset, doon nila nilagay yung mga...
Yung high risk.
Currency, gano'n.
Yes.
Pero siguro naman, in relation to the...
May risky, extremely risky, tsaka severely risky.
Correct. So in terms of, in relation to the whole asset, baka naman konti lang naman yun. But meron pong accountability. Meron pong oversight committee ito. You can call the fund to a hearing. Ganun. Meron oversight committee.
That's actually what I wanted to drive at because at the end of the day, we wanted to assure our people that Congress will still be part of this. May oversight function ng ating Kamara at Senado.
So meron pong internal auditor, meron external auditor, subject to COA, and then meron pang oversight committee.
Can I go before I something came up to my mind about the auditors? Yung pong sa DBP at Land Bank, yung binabanggit po natin na yung mekanismo that pwedeng mag-exit after 5 years kung mag-exit po yung DBP at Land Bank, will they still be part or still be members of the board, Your Honors? Sinasabi niyo, hindi kayo mag-exit kahit anong mangyari. Again, I'm sharing this point because if it happens, if we put this under the measure, then we need to amend the law again to take this into consideration if it happens.
Your Honor, can I respond from
Yes.
DP? I am guessing that this will have to be threshed out in the implementing rules and regulations or whatever will support the bill. There is no objection, I believe, that if the shares are removed from the corporation, then there will be no representation. I don't.
Siguro yun, i-provide nyo na lang po kami sa committee para matulungan namin kayo dun sa issue na yun. No? Mr. Chairman, kanina binanggit ni Secretary yung about the auditors and kami ni Senator Gatchalian medyo pag nababanggit yung external auditor, medyo hindi gumaganda yung mood namin, Mr. Chairman, kasi yung PAGCOR got a third-party auditor, external auditor, spend for 6 billion pesos. Hindi makita kung nasan yung office. Sabi, accredited or by international bodies, pero wala. Tapos may bangko, di ba, may bangko na nag-certify na okay siya pero yung bangko na yun hindi registered dito sa Pilipinas. Can you imagine that? So, it's unbelievable. And this actually happened with PAGCOR. Our chief gaming regulator, state regulator. So, ito, yung external auditor lang. Under the bill po kasi, the external auditor can be re-engaged. So is there no limitation to the engagement? Kasi di ba for Philippine public companies, I'm sure our chairman would know about this. Yung external auditors can only be the same for 5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
We can adopt the same what we have right now for the private sector po.
So you agree that we can adopt the same?
Yes, if it's
Okay.
a best practice right now, of course, sir.
You mean yun yung ilalagay natin?
Yes.
Okay, sige, thank you. So you have no
Of course, subject to the review of the performance of the auditor.
definitely. Ito po, where is it? Nasa Section 39, engagement of an external auditor. The board of directors shall engage for each accounting period or as soon as practicable after the commencement of the relevant accounting period, an internationally recognized auditing firm to be the external auditor of the fund and to audit its financial statements. The external auditor shall be engaged annually, be eligible for re-engagement, and hold office on such terms and conditions as are determined by the board of directors. So okay sa inyo na lagyan natin ng yung sinasabi nyo it's been the practice yung 5 years. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yung Section 11 po, Mr. Chairman, sabi ho dito, the founding GFI shall be entitled to prudential and other regulatory reliefs as may be determined by the BSP to promote the financial soundness of these financial institutions while contributing to the overall objective of the MIF. Yung Section 11 po also provides that the yun nga po, no, yung other regulatory reliefs as may be determined by the BSP. So how much will the Land Bank and DBP be able to invest without such prudential and other regulatory reliefs?
Your Honor.
Kasi parang yung last, and correct me if I'm wrong, yung sa DBP, they can only invest parang 400 million without regulatory relief. I think was mentioned last night.
Yes, Your Honor. That's our number. Without the relief, we can only invest 400 million at this time.
So how will they be able to invest without such prudential and other regulatory reliefs?
Your Honor,
I mean, will this role, ano po, will this role, I mean, would raise, binanggit natin to nung last meeting natin, competition issues?
Your Honor, if the regulatory relief will allow the bank to will relieve the bank from including the investment in its capital adequacy ratios. And
Can you repeat that again? Medyo malakas po yung, mas malakas po yung naririnig namin dito, sorry, sa likod namin. Kindly speak louder and turn on your mic.
sorry, Your Honor, the regulatory relief will remove the investment in the MIF in the fund from the computation of our risk-based capital adequacy ratio. And so with that removed, then we will be able to use the investments for our lending purposes. Yes. So it constrains us from doing that. And without the regulatory relief, if we put in the investment that is being asked of us, then we will breach the regulatory ratios.
And then that's my point, kasi parang meron kayong special treatment. We were with what's that, YPO yesterday. Some bankers were here and they were raising this concern. So again, don't you think there would be some sort of too much advantage or competition issues here?
With all due respect, Your Honor, as a government bank, although we are a universal bank and so is Land Bank, we also have a special role in economic development as we focus on development sectors, which many of the universal banks do not focus on. And so competition-wise, we do not think it's an issue.
I raised it, Mr. Chairman, so that it will be on the record and that we wanted to represent other stakeholders in this particular matter, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, isa pang gusto nating isuggest yung, siyempre alam naman nila Secretary Mina, Secretary Jokno, itong efforts natin to improve yung mining fiscal regime, no? And isa sa mga isinusulong natin yung EITI, yung FOI, Freedom of Information sa mga extractive industries. In 2021 po, yung total revenue from the mining industry is 126.4 billion using current prices, 94 billion using 2018 prices. The proposed amendments to the mining fiscal regime also has the potential to create additional revenue of 12 to 20 billion annually. So I wanted to ask this question, hindi ba natin pwedeng ito gamitin din po ito as a source of funding? Another, Mr. Chairman, I've been an avid supporter of the use ng single plastics bill. Your Senator Cynthia Villar actually passed this measure and we were very active on this particular law. Yeah, yung producer's responsibility, but also it will generate 38 billion. 38 billion po ito. So, my question is, ito ba, hindi natin, or tinignan din natin as a possible source of funding, or why not?
Yes, Your Honor, I already mentioned that because we have opened up the mining sector, I think that some of the royalties from the mining sector can be used as part of the fund here.
Okay, what about yung sa single-use plastics? Sa 38 billion.
Baka kailangan po ng national budget naman yung let's not overfund this fund.
Just trying to help, sir. Anyway, Mr. Chairman, I have some other questions, but it can wait. I will yield to some of my colleagues here who might wanted to ask some questions, Mr. Chair. honestly, Mr. Chairman, I also invited in this particular event. Behind us.
At this point, if there are no more of my colleagues who would, or colleagues who would like to ask questions, there being none, I would like to thank the resource persons, the senators, and the staff present. I think this is a very productive session. A lot of good ideas came out, and a lot of issues were clarified. At this point, we still have some ground. We still have ground to cover. We'll have another hearing soon, and we will invite some of the resource persons that were mentioned by some of our colleagues earlier, in order that we hear more opinions from our stakeholders. So the details of the next hearing will be announced through the committee secretariat. And if there are no objections, I hereby suspend this hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our resource persons.